This is a subject matter hearing, and I'm going to take some privilege in passing this on to our convener today, someone that has assisted me a lot in this endeavor, helping us draft this, is Dr. Conrad Worrell. Give him a hand.
How's everyone? In a session like this, around an issue that black people have been advocating for since the end of the 19th century, I think it's important today to take a moment of silence and acknowledge some of the organizers and activists who are ancestors who helped build the reparations movement in this country. So I'd like to call their name in a moment of silence. For those that we've identified, there may be others. Some are known and some are unknown. Callie House.
Ashe.
Queen Mother Moore.
Ashe.
James Foreman.
Ashe.
Dr. Imari Obadelli.
Ashe.
Attorney Chokwe Lumumba.
Ashe.
Brother Kalanji.
Ashe.
Sister Erlene Orikpo.
Ashe.
Sister Marcel Porter.
Ashe.
Sister Njeri.
Ashe.
Sister Dorothy Lewis Benton.
Ashe.
Brother Hannibal Afrik.
Ashe.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Ashe.
And Malcolm X.
Ashe.
So today's forum, symposium on local, national, and international on the reparations movement in America and the work we've been doing locally, nationally, and internationally. We've assembled some experts, and we're on a time schedule today, but this event would not take place without the leadership and philanthropy of Dr. Willie Wilson. A lot of people may not know, but Dr. Wilson has been a supporter of our work underground for many years. And those of you who remember African Liberation Day on the West Side, the major Kwanzaa programs of the National Black United Front, sponsored for many, many years. Without the philanthropy of Dr. Wilson, those events would not have taken place. So Dr. Wilson has stepped into the reparation movement to help push it with his support, and I want to thank him and greet him so he can greet you. Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Conrad. Appreciate it very much. And to all of the people who's here today, the panel, Brother Howard, and all the rest of it. I don't know those other guys' name. We just had the opportunity to meet them this morning, but thank them for coming in from around the country, continually to push reparation. We decided to get involved in this because of the fact that financially, as Conrad said, that we needed a push. And so when we heard this brought up in the president debate, first person I went to afterward was Boykin to take and write some type of proposal. Then I went to Alderman Sawyer to ask him to take it to city council. And from there we went to Matty Hunter, Senator Matty Hunter and Will David to present it in January to the state. We need everybody's support to make this work. I'm hoping that Conrad will take and continue to push this here around the country and get some more people to be involved financially to help make this go further along. I'm certainly here with him and hope that we could look forward to our next meeting, whether it's in Chicago or whether it's Washington, D.C., whatever he decides to do it. We can work out some of the financial side of it to be involved and help push this along. again, thank you, Conrad, and the rest of the people who in the forefront and been there for a long time. I'm just proud to play a part as related to the economic part of it. Thanks again. God bless.
I'd like to take this moment before we begin to acknowledge a couple of our colleagues that are here today. We have Alderman Matt Martin, Alderman Byron Cicho Lopez, Alderman James Kappelman, Alderman Carlos Rosa, and Rosanna Rodriguez Sanchez. Really want to thank you all for coming out today. Thank you.
I'd also like to acknowledge is Mazariki. Are you still here? This is Mazariki. This symposium is sponsored by the National Coalition for Blacks for Reparations in relationship in conjunction with Alderman Sawyer and his committee and Dr. Willie Wilson. Sister Mazarika Jawanza is the national co-chair. She came in here all the way from Indianapolis, and I'd like for her to stand up and give her a shout out. So our first presenter today is my longtime colleague, Dr. Ray Winbush, who's the director and professor of the Urban Institute at Morgan State University. Dr. Winbush has had a long career as a professor and a scholar and an activist. And since the late 1990s, when he was a professor at Fisk University and convened the historic Reparations Conference that produced the book that he edited, Should America Pay? He and I have been working closely together during all those years, over 20 years. I might point out that Dr. Winbush has just edited a book that just came off the press on the writings of the legendary and iconic Francis Cress Welsing called the Osiris Papers. His age prevented him from bringing boxes all the way from Baltimore, but we are going to bring Dr. Winbush back, and we're going to have a book roll out. I have a lead chapter in the book on Francis Cress Welsing's Chicago connection. So Dr. Winbush also was a major organizer when we went to Durban, South Africa, for the UN World Conference Against Racism. If you haven't purchased his book, Should America Pay, along with Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, I suggest you do. And so I'd like to bring before you my friend and colleague, Dr. Ray Winbush.
Ago. So, got drafted. I'm going to run through this presentation in about 20 minutes. Conrad told me to give an overview of reparations, the current state of reparations now. So this is going to be, I'm going to probably go through some of these slides by skipping them, but I wanted to do this. Let's all read this. Can we all see that? Okay, read that out loud. That is essentially, as far as I'm concerned, the sum total of what reparations is all about. You know, a lot of times rhetorically we say black folk built America, but that really happened. And there's empirical evidence, not just rhetorical, but empirical evidence to show that. So I'm going to run through some of the things that are going on right now. The 2001 UN World Conference Against Racism, as Conrad said, it globalized the reparations struggle. And it's not that the reparations struggle wasn't globalized then, but it exploded in 2001 at the UN World Conference in Durban. It allowed activists to share ideas and thoughts and strategies. In the work that I've done, I have found out the only common thread that African people have all over the world with each other is a discussion of reparations. They may call it they owe us, or in the Caribbean, these folk do this, or in United States, 40 acres and a mule, but the common thread that binds African people all over the world is the issue of reparations. Roger's up here, I'm sure he's going to say something about that. The declaration of the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity was critically important. And keep in mind that the World Conference ended, was it 3 days, Conrad? 3 or 4 days before 9/11. But coming out of Durban, that was like a major push for reparations. You can see some of the people. This is an old guy, Ray Winbush, and this was Yasser Arafat, several people. The Palestinians supported what we were doing there as well. Some questions asked and answered. I'm going to go through this. Has any government apologized for its complicity in the transatlantic slavery? Answer, yes, and somewhat. Benin did. France did an apology. The Vatican, 1993. The United States, somewhat with the House of Representatives. They said that we'll apologize for enslavement, but you can't base reparations on that. You can, in other words, I'm sorry we did this to you, but you can't sue us. And we'll get into that a little bit more. The Senate did the same thing, and in various states in the states, like I live in Maryland, there was a formal apology by the governor about, 6 or 7 years ago, but again, it was with the caveat, you can't sue us. Just we'll apologize, but we can't sue us. Glasgow University, you may know Sir Hilary Beckles, who spoke here, Conrad, just a couple of years ago, and they just agreed with a settlement, Glasgow University, of 200 million pounds. I forget how much that is, but it's a lot of money, okay? And it's going to be going directly to the Caribbean nations right here. Well, it's going to be going directly to the Caribbean nations. Another question, has any group or corporation apologized for its complicity in the transatlantic enslavement of Africans? Yes, the Southern Baptists did, again, no money. Muammar Gaddafi said the European nations should apologize for the enslavement of Africans. That was in '99. Aetna Life Insurance Company, JP Morgan Chase, Wachovia Bank, Archbishop of New Orleans in 2011. Have any private corporations paid reparations for the enslavement of Africans? Yes. JP Morgan Chase in 2005, and I call both of these things down payments. $5 million for high school scholarships for American African students in Louisiana. Wachovia Wells, which is now Wells Fargo, paid $10 million for national partnerships with organizations. And I don't like to put, but I'm going to put it, Cynthia McKinney told me not to put this up here, but I'm going to do it anyway. The black farmer settlement with the Department of Agriculture, which some people still say was a ripoff, but we don't have time to go into that. It was $1.2 billion. Have any nations paid reparations for the enslavement of Africans? No. The CARICOM lawsuit, CARICOM, Caribbean Community and Common Market, these are the 15 members of the CARICOM nations that are united in dealing with the issue of reparations. The European nations being sued, currently Holland, the United Kingdom, and France, and Scotland as well. I'm gonna just run through these quickly. This is what CARICOM said we all need to do. This is in the Caribbean. A full formal apology. Repatriation. There are some groups in the Caribbean who wish to repatriate to Africa, such as the Rastafari in Jamaica. And that's part of their 10 demands. Indigenous Peoples Development Program. what they did to the Caribbean. You know, Sir Hilary Beckles is, you know, fond of saying that what black folk have been doing globally for the past 500 years is really cleaning up white people's mess, what they did in the Caribbean, in this country, and so forth. Cultural institutions, European nations have invested in the development of community institutions such as museums and research. Why do all museums have to be in Europe or white nations? Why can't there be more in African nations to preserve culture? Public health crisis, we know that things such as hypertension, high blood pressure, and chronic diseases, diabetes, which is rampant among African people all over the world, has to do with the whole issue of enslavement. Illiteracy eradication. I read an article, they said when the British came, took over Jamaica, well, it says right here, some 70% of blacks in British colonies were functionally illiterate in the 1960s when the nation states began to appear. The colonized nations and the enslaved nations didn't teach us how to read and write. We know that already. 7, African Knowledge Program. We just need to know more about black folk. I teach a class at Morgan State, and I don't think this is a reflection on Morgan State, but other day in class I asked students about who was Alice Walker. And of a class of about 30 students, 3 people knew that. And then when I said, did you see the movie Color Purple? Oh yeah, I saw that. But they didn't associate the author of the book with the movie or anything else like that. So we just need to know more about what we have to say. Psychological rehabilitation. I always say that reparations is also the psychological trauma that African people have gone through. See, in that sense, and you know, I'm probably stepping on somebody, so Kanye West needs reparations. Not in terms of money, but psychological rehabilitation. And this, what's this woman, Stacey Dash? Same thing with Stacey. You know, y'all know who Stacey Dash? That's psychological reparations. It's needed that. And we don't have time to talk about this, but then technology transfer. Most of the technology in this world resides in European countries, even though much of the resources for that technology comes from African nations. I could talk about the Congo for days relative to that. And finally, debt cancellation. Caribbean governments have asked for debt cancellation as a result of their 10-point plan. So I put forth what I call the glass model, that these are the 5 groups that I think that have to be involved with the reparation struggle. Grassroots organization, I'll give examples of legislators, attorneys, scholars, and students. So grassroots organizations in the 60s were like SCLC, SNCC. Legislators were Adam Clayton Powell, for example. This was the civil rights movement. Attorneys, Charles Hamilton, W.B. Du Bois. He wasn't an attorney, but he was a scholar. Charles Johnson, John Hope Franklin. Students, Kwame Ture, Willie Ricks, Diane Nash, Jesse Jackson, John Lewis. You know that. So the glass model for reparations, I said that these are the 5 communities that must unite relative to the reparation. First of all, grassroots organizations such as NCOBRA, National Black United Front, the Indaba Movement, Republic of New Africa, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, Global African Congress. These are all grassroots organizations working on behalf of reparations. Legislatures, for example, Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, she held the meeting on Juneteenth, you know, in Washington, D.C. at the House of Representatives. Some politics to that, but I ain't got time to go into that. Joanne Watson in Detroit, many of you know her, very active in politics in Detroit as well as a member of NCOBRA. Dorothy Tillman, who it used to be, she's still here at Conrad. She's still here in Con. She introduced one of the first bills requiring disclosure of companies that dealt here in Chicago. Charles Barron, who's on the and has always been a supporter of reparation and an elected official. And Henry Brooks, a friend of mine in Memphis, Tennessee, who has introduced legislation in the state legislature of Tennessee about reparation. Some attorneys, Lionel Baptiste here in Chicago, you know him.
He had to go out of town. He's out of town.
Okay, y'all know Lionel. Yeah, y'all know him. Adjoa Atora in D.C., Roger Wareham, who's down there on the panel, drafted me to be first. And then Charles Ogletree, who, as you know, is at Harvard and is suffering now from Alzheimer's. but was instrumental in doing a lot of work for reparations, a lot of work. Scholars, example, Ron Walters, the late Ron Walters of the University of Maryland, a strong supporter of reparations. Richard America, economist at Georgetown University. Joy DeGruy Leary's, whose book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, all of you should read that. Conrad up here at Northeastern, Roy Brooks, University of San Diego, and Marimba Ani, the author of Urugu down in Atlanta. Students, and these are some of my students. They told me they wanted their name up there. So these are some of my students. And there's a lot of students. I've gotten over the past 5 years at least 5 or 6 requests for research for dissertations from Berkeley all over the country. Students are doing massive research on reparations right now, and I appreciate that. So they work together for the reparations victory, and roles, and this is a caveat, roles are not mutually exclusive. For example, Charles Ogletree was a scholar and an attorney. Conrad Roril, a scholar and an activist. Kofi Taharka down in Texas, an activist and community organizer. So most of you know Kelly House, right? What's the name of her book? My Face is Black is True. You should read that book. A first cause, I always say that women were the major, first causes of reparation. You should go back to Mum Bet, way back in 1780, who sued her master, so-called master, for enslavement. Belinda Royale, Queen Mother Moore, Callie House. So make sure you understand the women involved with the reparation struggle. These are, as I said, caveats. I know this is going to be controversial, but I'm putting it up here. ADOS is an anti-Pan-African hashtag cult backed by white supremacists, and it's also with the intangibles, and the people in the audience can say amen. No, I didn't. Okay, whatever. I knew this was going to happen. I'm going to let you handle the rest. This is an art. Thank you. This is an art. This is an article. I knew this would be happening. This is an article that's in today's New York Times.
Hold on, everybody. We'll get an opportunity to voice your viewpoints, please. Let's let them finish. Let's call it to order, please.
I'm used to this, and so is Talib Kweli and other people. Okay, brother. And then the second one, we need an Institute for Reparations Information Strategies and Education. I've called it IRIDE. You'll get your term, brother. Okay. And COBRA needs to be organized for maximum efficiency, and I talk about that here as well. Lawsuits need to be filed at several levels, at the state level against private corporations, at the national level against private corporations, and at the international level against private corporations. Infiltration. See, this is something that we never talk about within our movements. The black identity extremists that the Justice Department say have infiltrated the reparations struggle. I ain't gonna talk about ADOS anymore though. Let me hear from ADOS. Okay. In our history, we usually identify infiltrators after rather than during their disruptive activities. So we know, for example, that we know...
Hold on, wait a minute, Ray. Hey, my brother, let me make a point. ADOS just had a conference in Louisville, Kentucky. We did not come to your conference and disrupt. We didn't, excuse me, sir. My point is, we didn't come to your meeting and disrupt your meeting. And we would appreciate that you not disrupt our meeting. And at the end, you will have a chance to raise your question or point. So if you could just hold it until that time, I'd appreciate it.
So I want to end with this right here. Tuta Shinda Bilal Shaka. We will win, no doubt, regardless of other groups. Okay, thank you. Peace to ADOS.
Now, one thing that Brother Ray left out was the role of the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the period of the Muhammad Speaks newspaper that carried a platform and a position on reparations. We are here at Malcolm X College that grew out of Crane Junior College in the late 1960s. And it was the students at Crane Junior College who infiltrated the student government and who were members of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, led by Henry English, Stan Willis, and many others who had just come out of Vietnam and came back to go to school here on the West Side and led a movement demanding that Crane Junior College be renamed in honor of Brother Malcolm. So we need to understand where we are. This is actually the third Malcolm physical building. Malcolm's car is down the hall. His wife, Betty Shabazz, had a learning center, and she donated his car to us, and it was Buzz Palmer and Leonard Muhammad who drove to East Elmhurst, New York, to get the car and bring it here, and we demanded that they open up the windows so we can bring Malcolm's car in the building. So we need to understand where we are. We're at Malcolm X College, and in that regard, Malcolm said the following on the question of reparation. If you are the son of a man who had a wealthy estate, and you inherit your father's estate, you have to pay off the debts that your father incurred before he died. The only reason that the present generation of white Americans are in a position of economic strength is because their fathers worked our fathers for over 400 years with no pay. We were sold from plantation to plantation like you sell a horse, or a cow, or a chicken, or a bushel of wheat. All that money is what gives the present generation of American whites the ability to walk around the earth with their chests out like they have some kind of economic ingenuity. Your father isn't here to pay. My father isn't here to collect. But I'm here to collect, and you're here to pay. Malcolm X, November 23rd, 1964, Paris, France. So in that regard, Charles Barron, who was a teenager and joined the Black Liberation Movement as a Panther in the late 60s and early 70s, out of New York City, and somehow ended up being a leading activist and organizer, working with G2 Wausi and other activists on the East Coast in the development of the National Black United Front, which was founded in June of 1980 with 1,000 activists from 34 states and 5 foreign countries. And one of the workshops at our founding convention was on reparations, and Queen Mother Moore convened that particular workshop. So Charles Barron decided to run for office, and he ended up becoming a city councilman in New York. And then his wife ran as a state assemblyman, and so they had a tag team. So several years ago, they flipped spots because of term limits, and now Charles is the state assemblyman, and his wife is the councilman. How you like that for infiltration? But one of the great things that Charles put on the table, and he's carried it on to the assembly, is the Queen Mother Moore reparations bill. So today we want Charles to speak on whatever he's going to speak on, because you better hold your horses. But my friend and colleague, Assemblyman Charles Barron from New York.
As Councilman Barron is walking up, I'd just like to acknowledge a couple of our colleagues that have walked in since. Alderman Scott Wagersbach is here. Alderman Andre Vasquez. And the home of Malcolm X, Alderman Walter Burnett.
Black power. Say it like you mean it. Black power. Brothers and sisters, reparations without liberation, reparations without revolution, reparations without building a black nation will render us well paid and well fed still on the American plantation. Still on the American plantation. So as we raise the issue of reparations, we have to raise the issue of revolution. We have to raise the issue of systemic change, of a racist, parasitic, predatory, capitalist system. And as long as it exists, we're going to have problems. Our liberation is through revolution. I believe that's the only solution. So I want to give credence to the Black Panther Party and all of the political prisoners. And by the way, we were fortunate by being in the electoral process and not of it. We were able to free Herman Bell, who was incarcerated for 40 plus years, and Seth Hayes. Both were freed from New York State prisons. So as I speak of reparations, you know, there's certain issues that come up. When we ask for reparations, it's interesting. First thing, some whites will come up to you and say, how much? How much? You know, if I say every penny you got, you know. So when they say how much, nobody asks the Jews how much. Nobody asks the Japanese how much. I say to them, a crime has been committed, a people have been injured, and compensation is due, period. And sometimes you'll say, okay, you want to know how much? Martin Luther King said 800 billion in the 60s. The Amali Yeshiteli and the African People's Socialist Party, they came up with 4-point-some-odd trillion. Others are coming up with 6 trillion. So put the number out there. They say, well, how are we going to pay that? Well, you have a $22 trillion national debt. How did you get that debt? What did you spend that money on? And how are you paying that debt back? Well, if you could pay 22 trillion back to have a debt service, you take out 6 trillion, we'll take a couple of billion each year till you pay the debt. Reparations is a debt owed. Let's not get confused with things that they're supposed to do for you as tax-paying citizens. Don't give me no scholarships for reparations. That's what we're supposed to get as tax-paying citizens. So when you're talking about reparations, it's a debt owed. Don't you determine, the oppressor can't determine what they should pay you. Corporation can't say, you know, I was wrong, here's $5 million. No, you don't determine that. We determine that. And land has to be the basis of our payment. Land has to be the basis of our payment. So as we raise these issues, and please, between us, we argue about who should get it. Who should get it? How much? Listen, ain't nobody giving you nothing. You arguing over something that nobody made a commitment to give you yet. I don't think we should argue over something that nobody made a commitment to give you. Somebody, I know we should get paid, not this African, this one. We're Americans, we're not African. You're arguing over something not a single state, congressional, municipal legislation is offering you a penny, and you're arguing over something that you're not even offered. We need to fight together in unity on this. Let me get to New York State, the Big Apple. We ain't never had a bite, but New York City, little is known that New York City was the second largest slaveholding city in the country, New York. New York had slavery from 1626. Y'all remember they called it New Amsterdam? That was the Dutch. And they brought enslaved Africans to build the foundation of New York. New York State was New Netherlands. New York City was New Amsterdam. And then the English came with the Duke of York, beat the Dutch, and by the way, Peter Stuyvesant said that he could have beat the English if he wouldn't have to feed his 200 enslaved Africans. If he didn't have to give them food, he would have won that war. England beat the Dutch in 1664 and called it New York. And all of us sometimes we say, hey, Brooklyn, Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a Dutch name. Broekelen. And I know we know Harlem, Dutch names. That's how they conquered in New York. Murdered us. Stripped us of our identity. Raped our women. We sitting over here arguing with each other. They raped our women. Murdered us. Did all of this to us and had a nerve. You are lucky that we call in conferences. We should be talking about scorched earth. But we sitting here having conferences trying to work things out. America better listen. Reparations is the defining issue for the 21st century. They better listen to us. They better listen to us. And if we rise up like we should, they'll be so glad to pay you when 50 million African people rise up and say, we will not be governed anymore until you pay us our reparations. They will pay you. But we're going to go through the legislation process. So I put a piece of legislation together in reference to Queen Mother Moore, who put 1 million signed petitions on the desk of John F. Kennedy, the president, who black people like, never did nothing for us. You know, we are interesting people. This is the lionest country that there is on the planet. You know, Christopher Columbus discovered America. Only thing he discovered was that he was lost. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. He was a racist cracker who didn't want us in this country and wanted to deport us back to Africa. And he only freed those enslaved Africans in the states that were in rebellion against the Union, which he had no jurisdiction over. And the ones that stayed with the unions, he said, you can keep your slaves. So we got to get this thing correct. My bill simply says this. We want to set up a community commission on reparations remedies. I don't want your apology. I don't want to be studied to see if. This is a commission on remedies. And we will determine the form, land, the amount, and who's eligible to receive it. And I told them I want $250,000. We'll stay out for a year. We'll bring in some of the experts. And at the end of the year, we'll say to the legislature, this is the remedy. And if we do that state by state, every state had slavery. So let's take it state by state. Let's take it city by city. Sometimes when you're big bite, you say, oh man, we can't really do that. They ain't going to give us that. And this is interesting what they're doing in Congress now. We had a black president. We had Democrats controlling the Senate in 2008, Democrat controlling the House, a black president. John Conyers, may he rest in peace, was the chair of the Judiciary Committee where his bill, H.R. 40, was in. They had that for 2 years, never brought up reparations, never brought it to the floor. You come in 2019, and now the Democrats are having a hearing in Washington on reparations with a Republican Senate and a madman in the White House. Don't go for the okie doke. Don't go for the okie doke. Don't go for it. They have no intentions of seriously taking reparations on. I don't care. Why would they do it now? You had a chance to do it when you were in power with a black president and didn't do it. So now they don't have a black president to get out the black vote, so they want to appeal to you with reparations that they have no intentions of honoring. We say to those Negroes in their house, let me stop, let me behave with them. Let me be cool. Anyway, let me get back to New York. We have 40 of my colleagues have signed on to the bill. We got it out of the first committee, the Government Operations Committee, and now it's in the last committee. It's in the Committee of Ways and Means, and we're going to put a full force out next year, next session, to get it out of committee. We have a black head of the Senate and a black head of the Assembly. And you know, we got to look out for neo-colonial black puppets of the Democratic Party putting visibility of black visibility is not black power, especially if they are not committed to you. Dr. Lonnie Grenier in her book said that there's two kinds of blacks. Some are descriptively black, they look like you. And others are authentically black, they are committed to you. We need authentically black radicals, revolutionaries, running for office in these local city council seats so we can have power. When we said black power in the 60s, we did the black, afros, dashikis, African culture, Kwanzaa, Black History Month, Black history on college campuses, but we didn't do the power. We did the black, but we didn't do the power. We didn't have power then, and we don't have power now. We need to control our communities with the kinds of black people that we put in office. So I'm going to take my seat and say that we're going to be fighting for this in New York City. We have 8 million people in New York City. 2 million of them are people of African ancestry. We have 51 city council members. 27 of them are black, Latino, and Asian. It's time for us to have the power to go along with the numbers we have. I have to give a true confession as I take my seat, so just in case they talk about it somewhere, at a reparations rally that Roger Wareham on December 12th organized. I forgot I was an elected official, and I got on stage because the crowd was like making noise, about 100,000 people, and I was half playing and half serious. And I said, brothers and sisters, y'all be still. They got quiet, and I said, oh, now what am I going to say? Y'all be still. Said, we up there talking about reparations and marching. Let's go to the Treasury Department. Let's go take our reparations. They said, yeah. Now, y'all know they don't have no money in the Treasury Department. They write checks. So I'm just talking. Then I said this, when I get back to New York, I'm going to go up to the first white man in power and slap him and tell him it's a black thing. I forgot I was an elected official. ABC, NBC, all of the cameras was there. And I said, oh, man, when I got back to New York, oh, expel him. He's a racist. They were going crazy. And I had promised this radio program that I would come to them after the rally. So I got on the air, and I heard them. You could hear that they knew the quote. So they said, Councilman, good morning. I said, good morning. They said, how you feeling? I said, great. It's great to be alive. I just feel great. And they said, did you say for my black mental health, I'm going to slap the first powerful white man I see and tell him it's a black thing? I said, absolutely. That's what I said. And they said, could you explain that? Just to mess with them. I said, yes, it was a case of oratorical improvisation and black hyperbole. And they said, what? I said, oratorical improvisation and black hyperbole. So they said, what's a black hyperbole? I said, well, my mama said when I got on her last nerve, y'all know about the last nerve, I got on her last nerve on Sunday, she said, boy, I will slap you into Tuesday. Now, that didn't mean Monday wasn't going to happen for me. That's a hyperbole. That's a hyperbole. So they said, well, tell me another one. I said, well, my mother said, I brought you in this world. That is not my mama's commitment to murder. That's a hyperbole. So they said, oh, you were just playing. I said, no. My mama wasn't playing with me, and I ain't playing with you.
So moving right along. The National Ex-Slave and Bounty and Pension Association, led by Callie House, emerged in the 1890s. Organized 600,000 ex-enslaved Africans into the first mass movement reparations initiative in the United States. I hold here a clipping from the Chicago Defender, July 24th, 1915, where Callie House claims U.S. holds funds belonging to ex-slaves suing the United States government on behalf of the National Ex-Slave and Bounty and Pension Association for $69 million. Callie House was indicted in 1916 for mail fraud. Many people think it was the Marcus Garvey that they used that tactic on with J. Edgar Hoover, a young lawyer, in the 1920s. But it was Callie House that they used that tactic on. And when they convicted her, they told her, the judge, the white judge, that they were convicting her and sending her to prison because she was defrauding black people because she knew that white people would not ever give her what her movement was offering. So she spent a year and a day in a federal penitentiary in Tennessee. So we need to take our hats off strongly to Callie House and the National Ex-Slave Bounty and Pension Association. So in that regard, Attorney Roger Wareham, believe it or not, went to Harvard. That doesn't make him bad, because he really turned out good. And I'm glad I met him, because in the late 1990s, the December 12th movement and the National Black United Front hooked up. And little did I know the December 12th movement had become a non-governmental organization with status in the United Nations. And Roger Wareham became our tutor in how to work the politics of the United Nations Human Rights Center. And when it was announced that the UN World Conference against Racism would be held in Durban, South Africa, it was his organization and the leadership of the December 12th movement that hooked up with the National Black United Front and mobilized more than 400 African people to attend that historic conference. We still owe Roger a lot of money, and Lionel, because following Durban, Roger was a free lawyer for Deidre Farmer Pellman's case on filing lawsuit against 20 U.S. corporations right here in Chicago, and he did that work for free. So Roger Wareham is a revolutionary lawyer,
Yes.
who I'm proud to have been associated with and have been mentored by in the international component of the reparations movement, and I bring before you my friend and colleague, Attorney Roger Wareham.
Good afternoon. And I'm glad to be back in Chicago. I don't think I've been in Chicago since the lawsuit was knocked out back 12 or 13 years ago. But it's good to be back. This is a different Malcolm X College than the one I saw back in 2006. So I think that's good. I think it's appropriate that we're here in Malcolm X College because Malcolm X was one of our leaders who made it very clear of the relationship between our struggle here and the international struggle, that there was no separation, that we had to understand that we had to understand that the first African that was taken from the continent of Africa to be brought to this hemisphere, that was an international act. That was an international crime that we suffered from then and that we suffer through to today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we had done and when we went to Durban, and Conrad talked about the December 12th movement's involvement in the United Nations. It came from taking up Malcolm X's dictate to us around taking our struggle outside the very narrow parameters of civil rights that were determined by the people who were responsible for denying us our civil rights, and putting it in the international arena where we had allies. And so that's why we started going to the United Nations back in 1989, and from the beginning took up the question of how do we get repair for the damage that was done, not only from the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, but from the ongoing violations of our human rights that continue right now, 2019. That we are the victims of, we are the victims of what you could call a joint criminal enterprise. And you think about RICO, the Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organization Act, and you think of, because that's the mafia, that's organized crime. But we're the victims of organized crime, of organized criminals. The United States of America, Western Europe, France, Britain, Belgium, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, they were a criminal enterprise that started out in terms of the transatlantic slave trade, treating us as property, as capital, continued with colonialism, and we suffer the results from that today. And that's the point from the quote that Conrad said around Malcolm, we continue to suffer from those things. So it was not something like in 1865 when slavery formally ended, the consequences of slavery ended. It got worse. There was a book called Slavery by Another Name, which talks about convict leasing that occurred after the chattel slavery formally ended. And it was worse in some ways because you had no work, you had no reparations, you had no way to survive, and they pick you up for vagrancy. And then you can't pay to get out of jail, they lease you out. And these corporations leased you out and worked you to death because they didn't have to support you to keep you. You weren't their property. They leased you, like the way some people treat rental cars. They don't treat it the same way they treat the car they paid their money into. They treat it and they run it down, and they work people to death, and then they went and leased some other people. So that's the joint criminal enterprise that we are the victims of. In the international arena, we raised up the question of reparations because we saw it as something. Two things happened. In the United Nations, they had one of the items they deal with is racism. And when they had two world conferences against racism in the 70s and 80s, and at that point they were focusing on South Africa and Rhodesia. Rhodesia had not freed itself to become Zimbabwe at that point, but that's what they focused on because who could not be against apartheid in Rhodesia and South Africa? Even the Western countries who were supporting them, at least when they got in the United Nations, they would talk about, we can't support this. When Zimbabwe became free in 1980, when Nelson Mandela was released in 1990 and South Africa had its elections in 1994, the Western countries' position was, well, we no longer need to deal with racism. It's been settled. Because they knew once you got past South Africa and Rhodesia, it was coming straight at them in terms of the conditions of African people in their countries and in the countries that they had colonized and actually to this day still neo-colonized. So when we took up the question of reparations, we understood that it was going to have severe international implications, and it was going to have a lot of resistance from the Western countries. And I just need to lay out a little bit of the framework of the United Nations so you can understand how it functions. The United Nations divides countries into 5 geographical regions. There's an African region, there is an Asian and Pacific region, there is a Latin American and Caribbean region, there's a Central European region, and then there's this other region which they call the Western European and others. So I say Western Europe, and you know the countries that come to mind. But then when you get to the others, you sort of hop, skip around the globe. You have Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Israel, and I know that people in the United States are very weak in geography. But there's no geographical continuity with that group of the Western European and others. The only continuity is that they were all colonizers or settler colonies, and that's their unity. So you know that the deck is stacked when you deal in the United Nations around these regional groupings. We pushed as an NGO, a non-governmental organization, when they talked about taking racism off of the human rights agenda, we said no. And we worked with the African countries and the Caribbean countries around so that wouldn't happen. We pushed for there to be a world conference against racism. And the Western European countries said no, they didn't want to, and the United States said they didn't want to have a world conference against racism because they knew where it was headed. So they finally, after a lot of pressure, they finally agreed to hold a world conference. And the difference around this world conference against racism and the previous ones was the first world conference was a world conference against racism. This world conference was against racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. So that's like everything in the world. And if you throw everything in the pot, you dilute the focus on racism and white supremacy. And so that was their agreement to hold this world conference. So they agreed finally that it was going to be held in Durban, South Africa in 2001, and Ray mentioned that in his overview. And it was significant because South Africa had just freed itself from apartheid, Mandela was president, and so it was symbolic. We, as a non-governmental organization, said we had 3 issues that we wanted to see come out of this World Conference. It was not just to go there and have a feel-good and rub shoulders with diplomats. It was to have a very concrete product that would come out of that World Conference. And that concrete product were 3 things. One was a declaration of the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. Second was reparations for the victims, the descendants of the victims of that crime against humanity. And third was to recognize the, the economic basis of racism, that racism and white supremacy didn't just sort of float out the sky. It was an ideology that was developed to justify an economic enterprise. These were people who called themselves Christians, and they had to develop a rationale for why they were trading in human beings and treating them as property and treating them as less than human. So that's where the ideology of racism came. But to understand how it continued even when slavery was formally abolished, you have to understand that the economic enterprise continued, just in a different form. And that to have a country where a 0.1% of the population controls over 80% of the wealth, and not have that 99% of the country rebel against that is, well, how do they do that? I mean, how do you do that trick? You do it by playing people off against each other and making people who are basically in the same situation think that, you know what, I may be Po, but I ain't no nigger. And that's how, I mean, that's what the ideology of white supremacy is. And people buy into that. And so what we needed people to understand coming out of the World Conference Against Racism was that the basis of white supremacy and racism was economic. And once we grasp hold of that, you get to the points that Charles Barron raised around the necessity for a fundamental change in the system of the United States. But you got to get there through a process. You can't declare it. People have to come to that from their own experience. They have to push all the buttons and try all the levers and finally come to, you know what, this isn't working. And so out of that World Conference, people came from around the world, and black people came from all over. You know, there's like, I think it's like 15 to 16 million black people in Colombia. Nobody even thinks of Colombia as how many black people they have in their population. There's 100 million in Brazil. They dropped us all over the Western Hemisphere, which is why we speak different languages, you know, but our basic commonality, like Ray talked about, is the discussion around how do we repair the damage that was done to us so that we can exist as fully developed human beings, have communities that reflect that, and that we can develop to the fullest extent of our capability, of our possibility. So we came together, and black folks from Brazil, from Colombia, from Peru, from Ecuador, from Europe, talked about the different forms that racism expressed itself in their country. And they were all legitimate. But our struggle was that no matter where we came from, at the top of our agenda should be those three issues: the Declaration, reparations, and the economic basis. Because we understood that if we all talked only about the way racism affected us, nothing would come out. And the objective of these UN World Conferences is to come out with a document, something that you can take back and refer to. This was a document that came out, the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, that declared the transatlantic slave trade and slavery was and should always have been a crime against humanity, that reparations were due to the descendants of the victims. Crimes against humanity are very important because there's a thing in the law called statutes of limitation. Statutes of limitations are artificial times that are set by a country or municipality beyond which they say, if you haven't sued or prosecuted by then, that person's scot-free. So there used to be a limited statute of limitations on rape. There's no statute of limitations on murder. There's no statute of limitations on crimes against humanity. So if there were any possibility of taking these countries, these criminals, this joint criminal enterprise to trial or to task, it would be because there was no statute of limitations for the crime, not only for the crime they committed in terms of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, but the continuing violations of that crime right through Jim Crow, right through the conditions that we're all very familiar with that we face today. So we got, and like I said, there were black folks from all over the world, and non-governmental organizations. We got them all to agree that at the top of the agenda, of the top of what they were going to be lobbying for, were those three things, which was, some folks said that couldn't happen. That folks were going to be very narrow and only look at their own circumstances. But we got folks to agree, what is the commonality of Africans, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, who've been the subject of colonialism and slavery. So that was the first very major victory. And like I said, we had meetings, we had to have translators because people spoke French, they spoke Spanish, they spoke Portuguese, some spoke Russian. But we agreed on that. NBUF, Dr. Worrell, and our organization, the December 12th Movement, took 400 people to Durban to lobby for that. So in addition to what all the other folks that came, we brought 400 people from throughout the diaspora who were committed to that, which meant that when we got to the United Nations, when we got to that conference, we went out to the different delegations and talked to them around why this needed to be important. And it wasn't like this was the first time they had been hearing it, because prior to getting to the World Conference, the United Nations has what they call PrepComs. And it means that in each region, they have, in each region, they have a meeting to discuss what they're going to bring to the World Conference. The United States, well, we don't have time to go into all this, but they have PrepComs. At the very first international PrepCom, which was in Geneva, Switzerland, the United States delegate representative got up and said, if there's going to be any discussion in this World Conference about reparations or compensation, the United States is pulling out. So they drew a line in the sand. They said, if that's going to be in there, we're not going to participate. And what made it even worse was they had a black woman to front it for them, because they can always find somebody. They can always find somebody. So the United States made it clear that they weren't going to participate in it. But when they got to the World Conference in Durban, they didn't have the nerve to say that, given that there was a lot of publicity and that they would have to go back to the United States and tell. It's one thing to say it in a room in Geneva, Switzerland, where nobody's hearing it. It's another thing to say it at a World Conference that's covered by world media and is being beamed back to the United States, and they have to go back and say that we didn't deal with this because we didn't want to, and you remember the Secretary said it was Colin Powell. So they didn't want to do that. So what they did was they said, we're withdrawing because this conference is anti-Semitic, it's anti-Israel, which was a lie. It was a lie. They tried to pull that in the beginning. The Palestinians who were participating, Ray referred to, the Palestinians said, we are not going to make Israel an issue because we know if we do, they're going to use that as an excuse not to deal with reparations for African people. So that was never an issue. That if you read this document, there's nothing in here that says anything negative about Israel, but that was the excuse that the United States used to withdraw from it, which is once their usual hypocrisy. So at the end of the conference, with the leadership of the African group of countries and the Caribbean group of countries and the African group of countries, particularly Zimbabwe, took the lead in pushing for what eventually came out. We had this. So we finally had the first international declaration of what we know to be a reality, that what was done to us and continue to be done to us was a crime against humanity for which we are due reparations. So we brought that back to the United States. As Ray said, or Charles said, we landed on the 9th for coming back from Durban. The attack on the World Trade Center happened on the 11th, which really disrupted the momentum that was building around reparations. People were talking about it. We brought the lawsuits, and we don't have time to get it, maybe during the question, we brought the lawsuits against not only national but international corporations like Lloyd's of London, because they insured black folks. They didn't insure it for our benefit. We were private. Like they insured the wheat, the iron, the cotton, the molasses. They insured us against losses. The importance of Durban and the international stimulated the discussion around reparations in the United States. So much so that you had states like California passing legislation that forced companies that did business with them to disclose their ties to slavery. J.P. Morgan Chase, one of its predecessor banks, had I forget how many thousands of slaves as collateral because somebody defaulted on a loan. So you know what happens when you default on a loan? They claim the property. The property was us. And so they try to get out of it by saying they're going to give a little scholarship. And then somebody says scholarship is not reparations. Reparations is about repair. It's about repairing the damage that was done. It cannot simply be reduced to money. It's about repair. And it's something that's collective. I'm going to just finish by talking about also internationally that came out of it was in 2013 the Caribbean nations they came together to form a reparations commission that was mentioned that is trying to get reparations from the UK, I think France, Scotland, but that's all a reflection of what's going on and the importance. I think what I want to leave people with, that we have to understand the importance of the connection between what goes on nationally and internationally. That's why I said the first African that was taken, that was an international act. It was an international act. Because if we don't understand that, some of you, like me, are old enough to remember Vietnam. And one of the things that was very important in terms of the struggle around Vietnam was the struggle that the Vietnamese waged internationally to get support for the U.S. to pull out of Vietnam. And they were engaged in discussions in Paris. They understood that connection, that when you're waging a struggle nationally, you have to have international pressure because and what the UN does not resolve your problems. The UN creates a platform where it can be aired out and people from around the world can see it and hear it. And they also can bring pressure for what it is that you're trying to do. So you had 2013, you had the CARICOM. one of the things that came out of the World Conference Against Racism was a working group of experts on people of African descent. And that working group came here in 2015, and they were here in Chicago as well. They went around the country, and their report came out and said that Africans in the United States are due reparations. There's a special rapporteur on racism that came out of another world conference. And she came and she just wrote a report that she submitted to the General Assembly on the responsibility of countries to fulfill their debt on reparations. And she lays out the whole different things. And one of the things she lays out is that one of the problems is that when they're applying the law now around statutes of limitations and why it is states shouldn't have to pay, the laws they're applying were set up by them to make sure that they wouldn't have to pay. And I said, at that meeting, I said, look, I do criminal defense. I don't know any criminal who willingly surrenders themselves or willingly says, and says, this is how I should be punished. So it's got to be taken to another level. So domestically, we've got to be in the streets. We've got to push our elected officials, and I think it's really good that this brother's here because he said he wanted to learn. I think that's a very sincere approach. A lot of the politicians who are running for president, they're doing it because they think it's going to be a way to get black votes, which is different than having what we're having here today. So we got to be real clear and politically sophisticated around what it is, but we take advantage of those opportunities. The demand for reparations for us here and around the world, we're dealing with the same enemy in that sense, or the same debtor, or the same perpetrator of the same joint criminal enterprise. Because they have their own internal divisions, but when it comes to us, they are a joint. We have to look at them as a joint criminal enterprise. When I was at this last meeting, I said to the Special Rapporteur on Racism, I said, you are an independent expert. You're making these recommendations. It's very clear that there's no doubt that we're due reparations, that black folks around the world are due reparations. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I said, you are an independent expert. You should, in your recommendations, you should say to the General Assembly that they need to take the United States, they need to take Britain, they need to take France, they need to take Germany to the Security Council because they're violating international peace. You need to take them to the International Criminal Court because they are committed a continuing crime. You need to take them to the International Court of Justice. All the mechanisms that the United Nations has set up to deal with disputes and crimes, they need to be taken to that because they are criminals. The theme that we took to Durban, the theme that we took to the Millions for Reparations March in 2002 was very simple. It was, they stole us, they sold us, they owe us. Reparations now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity to announce a couple of our colleagues that came in. Alderman Sophia King and Alderman Pat Dow.
I hope we're learning something. This is a symposium. Are you learning anything? Yes. One of the problems in our movements, and in this case, the reparations movement, we have what is called historical discontinuity, where one generation does not know what the previous generation has done, and oftentimes people join a movement thinking they're first. We are standing on the work of our ancestors. And this is a protracted struggle around one of the deepest crimes inflicted on African people. So our next speaker is Beatrice Boyce, who is a political affairs consultant. I think Beatrice ran for office over in the 24th Ward. A young activist that done a lot to make this symposium successful with her marketing skills, and who's the chair of the Willie Wilson Progressive Political Action Committee. So I would like Beatrice to come up and say a few words, and I'd like to thank her for helping make this symposium successful.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I really don't feel like I'm privileged enough to sit on such a panel of scholars and history buffs and history majors. But I will say this, while I was in high school, I didn't have an interest at all in history. It just didn't interest me. Christopher Columbus, I didn't know who he was. It just didn't interest me. And then when I did take African American history, I just felt like there was so much missing. So my interest went towards business. So I wanted to learn how to type and how to be a secretary and how to run businesses and open up corporations. I used to travel downtown and get on the bus, and I used to go to Marshall Fields, and I used to watch all the Caucasian women with their fur coats and credit cards, and I used to wonder what that was about. So I took an interest in business instead of history. But after being called to the table by Dr. Willie Wilson to assist him in pushing reparations out into the community, boy, oh boy, have I learned a lot. And in learning it, my heart just aches with the torture and the pain that we've been through. I've had the privilege to speak to Black Panther leaders like my uncle, and they talked to me about how drugs became prevalent in the Black community, how they brought drugs into the community with pills and how they gave them away and then eventually began to sell them, and how they went from a nickel to a dime, from a dime to a quarter, from quarters to dollars, and then how our communities became so embedded and drug infested, and how many of our elders became drug users. And it just saddens my heart. And it's hearing stories like that that gives me the power and the inclination to get out in the street. When you see those reparation signs, that's me, along with two other gentlemen that are here, Ziv and Mr. Carson, who's out on a regular basis putting those reparation signs, teaching about reparations and what it is. And you would be amazed that so many of our people have no clue what reparations is about. So we had to find buzzwords like 40 acres and the mule. Do you know what that is? They can relate to that. But as we begin to talk about reparations and why we're due reparations, and then they begin to understand. But it hurts my heart even more to stand here and see that this room is not filled. Okay, these are topics that we need to come together on, and we need to stand together on. It's not about who's right, it's about what's right and who's been wrong. And all of us as African American people of color, we've all been wrong. So it doesn't matter if it's a capital A with a dash, it doesn't matter if it's ADOS, it doesn't matter. What matters is that this country owes us, and collectively we have got to come together to claim justice on what they owe us. And I really don't believe that there's a monetary or financial dollar that can be linked to this. It's bigger than that. It's broader than that. Free education is not enough. Land is not enough. Justice is not enough. It's broader than that. And I just want to take the time out to thank Dr. Wilson for even allowing this to happen. I want to take the time out to thank Alderman Sawyer. A lot of you don't know is that Alderman Sawyer, when you put yourself on the front line when it comes to issues that are this sensitive, people, you receive torture. You do. So for Alderman Sawyer to step out on the front line and take this thing holistically and push it through council, he deserves a standing ovation for that. He really does. He really does. And I just want to let each of you know the process as it relates to reparations. And the city of Chicago is going to receive reparations. We needed a certain amount of votes for it to come out of committee and go to the floor. I think we have a total of 28 co-sponsors so far for the bill. And I do believe every African American alderman has signed on to this bill. Am I correct? So let's give them a hand clap. We also would like to thank the Latino aldermen who have really been diligent. They have assisted in every way that they could. because we couldn't just do it. We couldn't just do it with just the African American aldermen. We needed support from across the board. We even have Caucasian aldermen that have signed onto the bill and is in support of it. There's one gentleman that I would like to recognize in the audience. Many of you don't know him, but his name is James Lundeen. In getting involved in reparations, we get a lot of phone calls, we get a lot of emails with Dr. Willie Wilson's foundation, and we get a lot of interesting phone calls. But one thing that I can say that I have noted in being out in the field, underground, that I run into a lot of Caucasians who really want to stand with us and fight this battle. They have recognized that their ancestors have wronged our ancestors. They understand and they recognize that there must be a payback for the injustice. And I had opportunity to sit with Mr. James Lundeen. Could you please stand up? Please. Please. I know I'm probably embarrassing you. But I sat and had breakfast with this young man. I'm going to call him a young man, but he's in his 80s, and he fed me so much wisdom and knowledge about reparations and how it relates to Caucasians paying that debt. So he's standing with us. I believe he was the director at one point, the president, but he ran Habitat for Humanity. So he had an opportunity to see a lot. He actually lives on the west side of Chicago, and he saw our reparation signs in his neighborhood. So he would take the signs up and he put them in his front yard like a lot of people have done, and he was consistent enough and persistent enough to send an email, and he got a response from me. And I just want to thank you for the time that you took out, for the education and the knowledge that you fed me, and so that I can understand that African Americans are not in this fight alone. So if you could give me a hand clap. And I also want to take this time to thank Dr. Claude Anderson. I also reached out to him. Many of you know him. He's called the godfather of reparations. How many of you feel about that, I don't know, but I've had some in-depth conversations about him. He actually sent myself and Dr. Wilson a stack of books for us to read, and one was Black Labor, White Wealth, and Powernomics. And he said to me that, Beatrice, you cannot talk about reparations to me until you read those books. So when I called back and said I read those books, he said, now we can begin a dialogue. So I just want to just say thank you to him as well for keeping me educated, and thank you to all of you. Thank you to the scholars. I'm going to continue to learn. I'm going to continue to fight. You will see me on the front line. Don't badger me. Don't talk about me, but join me, because I too am open to criticism, but I'm also open to learning the things that I don't know. So what I don't know, will you please teach me? God bless you.
Before we go to our final presenter, I'd just like to acknowledge Attorney Larry Kennan. I think Larry's about 90. And I don't know if you all heard, I said Larry's about 90. And Larry has been through more movements and participated as a lawyer, helping in the legal arena and the overall civil rights and black movement in this city when I was a teenager. And so I'd just like to thank him publicly for all of his contributions and being present today at 90. I also want to thank my good friend, Brother Abdullah, who's over the prison ministry of the Nation of Islam, he's all up in the prisons all across this country. And Charles Barron mentioned Herman Bell, who was freed as over 40 years, the Panther 21. Well, it just so happens that Herman Bell is the brother of Earl Bell, who was the chief of staff of Donnie Trotter as state senator. So I just wanted to have a little shout out for the Bell family that suffered so much with their brother in prison for 40 years. I don't know how to do this one, but when you have a student that shows up and then he goes out and thinks he's a great organizer and a political person, but Tito Hardeman got his master's degree at the Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies, where I worked for many years, and I just want to acknowledge Brother Tito. So the young man that's coming up next is the new wave of organizers and activists, not only in Chicago, but in the country, in his role as the national co-chair for the National Coalition for Blacks for Reparations in America. I know the founders, Dr. Imari Obadele and Queen Mother Moore, and Chokwe Lumumba, and Kichi Taifa, Dorothy Lewis Benton, Hannibal the Freak, and many, Brother Kalanji and Sister Adjoa, Toy. I know all of them are so happy that the next wave of young leadership is taking up the banner. Old folks like me, we can advise. But one of the things movement does is produce new leadership. And we have a continuity of leadership, and I appreciate working with Cam, even though he may not appreciate working with me, because sometimes I'm a trip.
That's putting it mildly. That's true.
So I know that when he answers my call, it's in love, because sometimes my phone calls can be quite penetrating, and if they were recorded, I probably could make a lot of money. So with that, our final presenter today is a young man. He's not that young anymore, but when we came back from Durban, he joined the reparations movement. Let's give Cam Howard a big round of applause.
I want to definitely thank everyone who came out today. And before I begin my presentation, how's this? Better? Before I begin my presentation, I want to acknowledge a couple of people. First, I want to acknowledge Congressman John Conyers. If we can just have a moment of silence for the Congressman. As many of you know, he transitioned a couple of Sundays ago, and he was instrumental in so many major legislations in this country, none probably bigger than the Voting Rights Act of 1968. It was a result of that act that he was a co-author that you went from less than 1,000 black elected officials in this country at the time to now over 12,000 black elected officials. So we want to honor Congressman Conyers. I also want to honor a young lady, I don't know if she's here. Robin Simmons, are you in the building? Anyway, this is a young lady out of Evanston who, she's an alderman in the city of Evanston, who has passed the Reparations Commission. So I wanted to honor her and allow her to say a couple of words, but she hasn't made it. So my presentation is pretty much entitled Reparations as Demand. I was supposed to give the national picture of how this reparations demand is being carried out, and then with a focus on the city of Chicago. I'll talk about reparations as a demand. I'll talk about the congressional actions that are taking place. I'll spend just a minute or two on the presidential elections, and then I'll relate it to how it is operating here in the city of Chicago with the Reparations Commission resolution that is being introduced by Alderman Sawyer. And then I'm going to put a call to action to everyone who was here in this audience to join this movement so we can make this happen. Before I begin, I want to just thank Dr. Willie Wilson for joining this movement. Many people have asked me all around the city, no matter where I go, radio stations, whatever, is this just a political piece for Dr. Wilson? Is he doing this because he's running for senator, because he has political aspirations? I said, of course he has political aspirations. He's ran for mayor twice, he's ran for president, he's running for senator, so of course he has political aspirations. But I've heard him speak several times at many forums where he talks about running away from picking cotton at the age of 11, age of 12, I think it was 11 and 12. And Brother Roger Wareham talked about the convict leasing. If you were caught running away even from picking cotton, you could be locked up and sent to prison as a vagrant and been put back into this new form of slavery. So that was the danger that he faced at 11 years old. He made that choice. And every time I hear him tell that story, I can feel the pain as if it was my father telling that story. And so when he says that he's in this because he truly wants to help people, I believe him. And I just want to give him a hand again for I want to give a hand to Alderman Roger Sawyer. Again, it takes bold and courageous leadership to introduce legislation of this type in this country. You're going to get all type of enemies going to come out of the woodworks. And so we have to rally behind him as he introduces, as he pushes this forward. One thing about being last on the speaker on the panel, when all the previous speakers are your teachers, is that they've said everything you want to say. So, Dr. Winbush is a board member of Cobra. Thank you, Dr. Winbush, for being here. State Assemblyman Barron has named Cobra as a member of the commission. And Brother Roger Wareham, I was in Ethiopia, and the brother who organized a forum on South Sudan told me personally that Roger Wareham came to Switzerland and said there should be a world conference against racism. And history was made by this brother's bold attempt. All over the African world, we are speaking the same language. That this transatlantic slave trade, slavery, colonialism were crimes against humanity, and the perpetrators, these governments, these corporations, were criminal entities, as Roger Wareham stated. They might be just entities, they might be legitimate entities, legitimate governments, but in relationship to African people, they are criminals, they will remain criminals until they engage in reparative measures with us on our terms. Many people say that in this reparations movement, we're asking for reparations, or we're begging, or we're pleading. Reparations is a demand. And I want us to be clear, the reparations is a demand. One of the definitions for demand is a claim for what is owed, what is just, what is due. It is a claim for what is owed, what is just, what is due. Now, many of you, I know I'm not the only person who get demand letters in the mail. They call them final notices. But if you look on the fine print, it says this is a demand for payment. And so when we talk about reparations as demand, we're saying the same thing. You owe us trillions for the stolen labor and the harms that have been committed against our people for 400 years. It is due. We've never engaged in any type of settlement. So when we say we want reparations, this is part of the claim. We want a settlement. And it is just. As Roger Wareham said, they stole us, they owe us, and reparations are due. Crimes were committed, injuries were suffered, the injuries still remain, and we know who the perpetrators of those criminals are. And if this is a nation of law and order, if this is a city of law and order, then those crimes must be justly addressed. And so we're here to make that demand. On the congressional side, H.R. 40 was introduced in 1989. It was revised in 2017 by a group of panel that was called together by Dr. Ron Daniels and the National African American Reparations Commission. I'm a member of that commission. I sit on that commission. I think Dr. Winbush was part of the initial group that was charged to revise H.R. 40. And one of the things that I wanted to put into that revised bill was that we don't use the standards of reparations that this government wants to use, or white America wants to use. We want to use the standards of reparations that is based on international norms and international law. And under international law, reparations must, quote, wipe out all consequences of the crime, unquote. It must wipe out all consequences. In order to wipe out all consequences, the state must engage in what is called full repair or full reparations. And that full reparations has 5 components. And we wrote this into the legislation. Those 5 components are: 1, cessation and guarantees of non-repetition. The nation must cease whatever bad acts it's doing. We know that there are countless laws here in America, state laws and city laws, that have a disproportionate negative effect on people of African descent. They were called black codes in the 1600s and 1700s. They have the same effect as black codes, but they're called race neutral today. Those laws must be stopped. The second component of full reparations is restitution and repatriation. And this is where some of the economic and educational type of structures have to be put in place. The systematic overturning of the racist structures in this country is part of the restitution. The third component is compensation. Yes, compensation is a component of reparations, and there should be monetary compensation awarded to people of African descent in this country. That's in H.R. 40. The fourth component is satisfaction. How do you return the dignity back to a people whose dignity was eroded as a result of these crimes you committed against them? All the history in this country has to be retold. All the curriculum books in this country have to be rewritten. Apologies, monuments, museums, those type of things also meet the standard of satisfaction. Dr. Winbush talked about the CARICOM, wanting museums, major museums in the Caribbean. That's part of satisfaction. That's part of returning the dignity to the people. I was in China in 2016, and I'm walking down the street, and old Chinese women are walking on the other side of me. They move over to the other side of the street as I'm walking past. Now, I'm not 20 years old. I'm 58 years old. I was 55 at that time. Why would she be scared of me if it wasn't for the exported image of black people that this country has produced? And so she was scared of me, and it was not just one, it was several instances where that took place. So our image has been damaged globally as a result of these crimes that have been committed against us. So satisfaction is a component. The fifth component is rehabilitation for the heart, mind, and spirit damage that our people have suffered and still suffer. And so that's what's written into this legislation, H.R. 40. You have a copy of the H.R. 40 primer. What I've just talked about is in this primer. Those 5 components and what some of the policies can be used to meet those 5 components. Currently, there are 120 co-sponsors of this legislation. Never has there been more than 40, 45. There's 120 co-sponsors. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who took up this bill, is going to call for a markup. A markup is where in the lower committee, she asks the full Judiciary Committee to debate the issue and vote on it, and if it passes out of Judiciary, it goes to the full House for a floor vote. And so we're expecting that to happen in early 2020. Currently, there are 17 Republicans in the Judiciary Committee and 24 Democrats. So we have 17 Democrats who have already signed on as co-sponsors. So those last 7 Democrats are going to sway this particular bill one way or the other. And so COBRA has a campaign that we're working to get those other 7 signed on, at least 4 signed on. We have 51 of the 50 CBC members that are co-sponsors of the legislation. So this is the first time in the history of this country since the Reconstruction has there been a possibility for both houses of Congress to debate this issue of redress, of reparations. And we cannot allow this time to be squandered. We have to be working hard making this demand. In the presidential race, no Democrat has won a majority of the white vote in the last 50 years. Not one. And it ain't going to happen. The Democratic Party knows it cannot win without the black vote. In the last 50 years, Republicans on average receive 55% of the white vote. Hispanic and Asian votes practically cancel itself out. For every 2 votes a Hispanic or Asian votes for a Democrat, they vote once for a Republican. And so there's only a net 1 positive vote. Democrats cannot win with Asian and Hispanic votes. The only way they can win is with the black vote, and they know this. I was at Congressman Conyers' funeral last Monday, and President Clinton was there. And the first thing he said is, well, we know that neither Carter, nor myself, nor Barack Obama could have won without the black vote. Currently, the Republican Party receives about 55% of the white vote. And this is just a graph to show what percentage of the white vote that Republicans received since 1976 and what percentage of the Democrats have received the white vote. And so we can see clearly that if it was a contest between white folk, Republicans would have won every year. But the more we're in the mix, we determine the outcome. And so this is a time, just like I was saying, reparations is demand. You get that final notice in the mail. And if you don't care, Alderman, I got a final notice from the Department of Finance last week for a water bill, right? Now, I have to pay that water bill because I want to stay in my house and I want to, bathe myself. But if I didn't care about that house, I would ignore that water bill. The Democrats right now want the White House. We make the demand. We make the demand. They cannot ignore us if we're collectively making the demand because we have what they want. Now, State Assemblyman, I'm a revolutionary. Well, as we talked before, there's some reform things that we can do on the way to revolution. And so I think in this Democratic election or in this presidential election, black folks have to be really pulling together as the #1 issue for us is this demand for reparations. And we can do it if we do it collectively. Making demand in the city of Chicago, how does it relate? Well, of course, we fully support the efforts on Dr. Wilson and Alderman Sawyer. We thank Dr. Willie Wilson and Alderman Sawyer for their leadership on this issue. And COBRA has prepared 10 talking points on the Reparations Commission. You have that in your primer. It's this document. And I'm not going to read all of this, just a few of those talking points. Number 5, it is well documented that racially discriminatory public policy directed toward blacks in Chicago has led greatly to the gross disparities of the quality of life for black Chicagoans compared to all other ethnic communities in Chicago. So here we're talking about public policy has created the conditions that we face today. Some of these policies amounted to outright theft of black wealth and near total disempowerment and economic devastation of the black community. These accumulated harms show themselves in massive health challenges, deteriorating communities, increased violent crime, poor educational performance, a decimated business class, and intensified hopelessness and trauma, among other injuries. Is Jack McNamara in the house? Jack, can you stand up? Professor Jack McNamara. Now, Professor McNamara, I asked him to stand up because he led a group of students in researching the amount of theft that this city extracted out of the black community from the periods of 1950 to 1970 via redlining, via housing discrimination, the amount of theft, with the complicity of the government and their agencies. And that number for that 20-year period amounts to $4 to $6 billion in today's money. So this city is also complicit in some of the crimes that have been committed against us. We know from 2007 to 2012, black people in this country lost $200 billion in wealth. From 1865 to 2007, we amassed $380 billion in wealth. It should have been 10 times as much as that if it wasn't for the crimes that were committed against our people during that time. But in 5 short years, we lost over 60% of it during the subprime housing scandal. Billions here in the city of Chicago. So we are living today the impact of those crimes committed against us with city complicity. We're living it right here today. Sorry, sister, I hope this is better. We know about the 100 years of terror in this country, from white mob action to police terror, police action against our people, from 1919 race riots to the murder of the chairman Fred Hampton and the torture of John Birch victims, to present day Laquan McDonald and other criminal actions on behalf of the police department. These are crimes committed by the city of Chicago, their departments, and as Roger said, crimes were committed, injuries have been suffered, injuries remain, so reparations are due. And so we stand completely in agreement that there should be a City of Chicago Reparations Commission. And we have scholars and we have allies on all sides of the spectrum that also agree with this. And again, Alderman Roger Sawyer and Dr. Willie Wilson, we couldn't be here today in this space if it wasn't for your leadership. In closing, Cobra has a motto, reparations ordinance that we've been working with Dr. Conrad Worrell and Commissioner Richard Boykin, that looks at what type of city public policy can be created in those 5 areas of reparations, in the 5 areas of full repair. And we'll be more than happy to share that with you. But right now, we want you to agree, 1, that this is necessary, and 2, that you will do something to help make it a reality. Also in our primer is, on the bottom half of this page, it said, meet with Cobra. Meet with us. Strategize with us. Bring your leadership capabilities. Bring your ideas to this body, and let's collectively move this issue forward and stand with these 2 giants who have stood with us and make this a reality. Reparations now.
So we're getting ready to move to the open session for questions. This is an official committee meeting of the Human Resources Committee of the City Council of Chicago, so this is being documented. I want to point out, before we make that transition, that spiritually, we're right around the corner from 2300 West Monroe, where on December 4th, 1969, in the wee small hours of the morning, Everett Hanrahan and the law enforcement agency assassinated Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. I also want to point out that this movie, Harriet, is out. Just hold up, because Hollywood is producing a movie on the Panthers and William O'Neill's role in infiltrating the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. I just want to point out we need to be careful about the debates we're having between each other over Hollywood, because they created the model in 1915 in Birth of a Nation, in creating the imagery of Toms, Coons, mulattoes, mammies, and bucks. And if we don't finance our own imagery, our own movies, not to say that protest hasn't gotten some concessions out of Hollywood, but let's not kill each other off on social media about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a great woman. We know what she did, and let her rest in peace, and let Hollywood go over there if we continue organizing and using this occasion for many of our young people in these schools across America who have no clue as to what Harriet Tubman is. And they're going to the movie. We're calling for a boycott, and it appears that more people are going to the movie. So that ought to tell us something. Just a word of caution. In July of 2003, I wrote Minister Farrakhan a letter and asked him to convene all the reparations organizers and activists that we could identify. We met at the Salam restaurant, July 23rd, 2003. And many of the activists and organizers since that time have become ancestors. Imari Obadeli was there. Hannibal Lafrique was there. Dorothy Lewis Benton was there. And in that meeting, our great political scientist, Dr. Ron Walters, was not able to attend. And he sent me a paper that's been buried in my archive that I think is important to resurface. And the title of the paper was Unity in the Movement for African Reparations in America. And although we have a lot of different views in our activism on reparations, I think it's time to call a truce. I think it's let me just say this. In the paper, Dr. Walters said our unity is old, before Europe and before America was born. The foundation of our political systems was rooted in the concept of consensus. For example, when important issues were called for in the Ashanti culture, the chief called a meeting known as the Asante Kisa, which means the big sit-down. In South Africa, among the Nguni, the practice was known as the Ndaba. And we took that concept out of that meeting, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan put his mighty resources, and we went to Jackson, Mississippi, where our great brother Chokwe Lumumba eventually became the mayor. And we filled up a stadium of more than 20,000 people talking on reparations. We went to Houston, Texas, and had an Ndaba, a big sit-down, and another 50,000 people came out to that meeting. We went to Baltimore, Maryland, where Dr. Winbush hosted us and had another thousands and thousands of black people discussing reparations. And our final Ndaba was in Atlanta, Georgia. So given the fact that social media now has entered into the fray, and everybody thinks that they got an answer, and everybody thinks that they're an expert, I would suggest that none of this will work as long as we're divided. And so, as someone who over the last several months has been engaged in this ideological debate at a very high level, taking on forces that I absolutely disagree with, does it mean that at this point in our maturity and political development that we can't strive for unity? Because if we don't have unity on this question of reparations, they will continue to do what they always do, and that is to divide and conquer us, and we will not have accomplished our objective. So I know there are a lot of hard feelings, but these hard feelings got to go away. What we need is political action, political organizing, and if you want me to apologize for anything I've said, I apologize. Now hold it, brother, you talking, and I apologize. If I said something that turned you off on social media because you're part of ADO, I apologize. Now you should accept the apology and not try to disrupt the meeting. So, well, first of all, we needed to know how to conduct a meeting. We're chairing the meeting. I'm opening up a can of worms, and I'm addressing a very sensitive topic that's been going on in our community the last 8 months through social media on the question of reparations. And Spirit has urged me, as an older person, as someone who's supposed to be an elder, to try to bury this today and see if there's any way we can find a way to work together. Now, that's the best I can do today. So what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to my friend, the Alderman of the 6th Ward, Alderman Rod Sawyer.
Thank you, Doctor. First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I'm going to open it up first to my colleagues if they had any questions. But before I do that, I know you heard Brother Cam Howard talk about a young sister in Evanston, a colleague of ours, an alderman in Evanston, has doing something similar, and he wanted her to have a couple of minutes to speak, and I want to grant her that opportunity. So I want to bring up for a few moments before we go into public comment, comment from the alderman, then public comment, our colleague in Evanston, Alderman Robin Simmons.
All right. Thank you, Alderman. Thank you for giving me a moment to speak. I didn't come prepared to do so. I really came to be in a room with thought leaders and like-minded folks that understand why reparation. And I am an alderman in Evanston, the alderman of the 5th Ward, which is the historically black community. And I have only been in office 2.5 years. And through my frustration of doing community development work and diversity and inclusion and working hard to make a difference, to bridge the economic gap and deal with our disparities, I got to the conclusion of reparation. So in Evanston, to date, I'll fast forward my efforts over the last several months, my colleagues have agreed with me and we have unanimously approved a move forward for reparations in Evanston. So I have to thank my colleagues because I'm only one of 9 votes, but the timing is right. The community was prepared. We've had hundreds of resolutions and ceremonial actions and honorific notions, and it was not enough. And my challenge to the community is, why don't we move past apology now and put some action and some funds behind these commitments that we have articulated for all of these years. So we are working towards a goal. It's a small city, it's $10 million, and that's not enough for our city, but it certainly is a commitment beyond apology. So my proposal beyond that is that we use our tax revenue for the new recreational marijuana sales to fund our reparation. Why shouldn't we? Our community was most damaged from the impact of marijuana sales, and now it's a glamorous multi-billion-dollar industry. We should certainly benefit from that tax revenue. So that is my proposal. We're in budget season right now. I ask that you all lift me and my city, Evanston, in good spirits as we move forward for reparation in Evanston. And I am here with you, Cam. Thank you so much for supporting me in Evanston. I can't tell you what it has meant to me. Sometimes I have felt like alone and I'm crazy and nobody gets it. But organizations like this here have been a big support, even in Evanston. So Chicago is not alone. Reparations now everywhere. All politics are local, and if they want to argue it at a national level, we certainly have demonstrable damages in Chicago and Evanston and every place else where we can work on it at a local level. So thank you for this moment. I appreciate it, and all the best to you.
Thank you, Alderman. We'll definitely be in contact with you and see how the progress you're making in Evanston. At this time, I wanted to see if there were any questions or comments from my colleagues from the City Council. Right after this, we'll be proceeding to public comment. Alderman Kaplan.
Alderman James Kaplan. I was really looking forward to being here. I was hoping to see a lot more white people here. That's work for me to do. I got my master's in social work at Jane Addams School of Social Work, and I remember we had a class that talked about institutional racism, and it said that you look at the amount of education that you have in this room, the United States that you have, there's a direct correlation to how much property your ancestors had in the United States of America in 1860. A direct correlation. So, my ancestors, we didn't get the 40 acres in the middle, it was 200 acres. I have 7 brothers and sisters. All of us have a bachelor's degree. Half of us have master's degrees. Clearly, there is work to do. And I learned a lot today. I admit, as a white person, I am blind to a lot of this. I grew up in Houston, Texas. I remember as a little child, there were 2 water fountains in the store of Sears. And I remember sneaking to go to drinking at the water fountain marked for, quote, colored people, just because I didn't understand it. And I knew I had to sneak it because if I was seen, I would get in trouble. And there was a difference in the water. The water for colored people was actually from a child's fountain, and it was lukewarm water. And of course, for white people, it was nice cold water. The racism continues. In Chicago, I'm surprised the racism is deeper here than what I grew up with in Houston, Texas. So there's a lot of work to do, and I'm embarrassed by it, but I stay committed to doing my part and working with my colleagues to do some needed repair. I'll say this one last thing too. It's the nature of groups that are experiencing oppression to fight among each other, to get forward, to win this fight. We have to stay united. So I want to stand united with you as well. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions of the panelists here today? I think Alderman Wagensback was behind after.
Hello, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I want to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity of being here today. Thank you, Chairman Sawyer, and everybody who has contributed to this incredibly urgent conversation. Sitting here and listening is deeply painful, and it resonates. I am Puerto Rican, and the horrors of colonization and the horrors of slavery live in all of us. So I want to ask a question about the place of Puerto Rico and the discussion of reparations in terms of being a Caribbean country, one of the places where the shit stops. I didn't see it in the list of countries from the Caribbean, and I'm just curious about what is the conversation going on around that. Thank you.
I think they weren't listed in the country of CARICOM because the United States, it's a colony of the United States. And so they don't have an independent status. Inside the United Nations, inside the Decolonization Committee, there's an ongoing debate around the independence of Puerto Rico. But certainly there's a recognition of, one, in terms of people of African descent who are in Puerto Rico do that. And also, a part of the of the struggle internationally, when we were putting forward the resolution in the United Nations at the World Conference, it was really to declare the transatlantic slave trade, slavery, and colonialism as crimes against humanity, which would then speak to the situation in Puerto Rico. What happened was that because there was so much opposition by the Western countries, because they're all guilty of colonialism as well, they put aside colonialism to focus on the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, but there was definitely a recognition of that. And I know just personally, myself and my organization support the independence of Puerto Rico.
That was another question I was thinking about, because Spain was not in the Western culture that were mentioned either, and Puerto Rico was the colony of Spain before being the colony of the United States. So I think that's.
Spain was.
So I didn't see it listed, and I was confused by it, but yes.
That's probably just knowledge.
Okay.
Spain, Portugal, Belgium, Western Europe. They all had Switzerland acquired this cap. Norway, Sweden, Denmark. They like to act like they're not part of it. They were all part of it. That's a part of history they don't teach us in school.
Alderman Citro Lopez, and I think Alderman Wax got that question, and Alderman King. Alderman Rose.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Sawyer, and thank you to the wonderful panel. I think it's great to see these meetings being conducted in the community. I think this was the first one. I'm a new alderman, but it's great to see. I think there was a lot of work to do to get the information out. For many of us members, not only of the city council, but different caucus, I think it's important to express solidarity, but also understanding of the deep levels of oppression. Structural racism is very much alive today. These steps towards reparation are just an important fundamental steps that we need to take as public officials, and the courage it requires. I really want to thank the panel and Alderman Sawyer for taking the leadership on this. I know these are important steps, and we need to show the solidarity. Also want to thank everybody who made this happen through all the efforts, through the different angles, philanthropy, whatever that is. One aspect I want to ask, I know that this issue of international policy, I actually grew up in Ecuador. I think that you mentioned about the deep oppression and slavery that is very deeply in the international policies that we continue to see today, and also the intervention that we can see to stop these efforts, not only here locally but internationally. So how can we do as public officials to connect these dots, to make sure that we don't separate each other, we see everything interconnected? I'm glad to see many members of the Latino caucus here. I think we need to make sure that we understand how deeply connected these struggles are, but also internationally. I see there's a lot of issues now in different waves and the oppressions in Brazil and so on that deeply affect the most vulnerable. Black and brown solidarity is more important than any other time in history. So how do we make this happen at the local level? How do we connect it internationally? And what can we do to make sure that we continue moving forward? I see these efforts federally, state level. What do you think is important that we can do to help these efforts? And thank you again for taking this moment to inform all of us.
Well, one is doing what you did by coming today to show your support for these issues. I think also it's fighting the very, I'm trying to think of the word, divisive rhetoric that comes out of this country in terms of pitting people who are basically in the same situation and are objectively not enemies as enemies. And speaking of encountering the very narrow nationalistic, white nationalistic rhetoric that's coming out of this country. I mean, it's taking a stand against that, which means that you can come under a lot of fire. You got to be willing to take the fire you're going to get from the White House and some very backwards people. I guess it's also, the United States education is very, very nationalistic and very narrow like the United States is an exception to whatever else goes on in the world. That requires input in the educational system as well, but also taking public positions. I don't know, I mean, it's a very complex question, but it's complex, but it's also very simple in terms of, you know, the Berlin Conference in 1884? 1986, divided Africa up. They just took a map and they just drew lines, and they divided people by families, I mean, language, and out of that, Africa, when it obtained its independence, respected those lines, and it was set up in a way to divide, and it still does in a way. And I think it's really a question of in Africa, it's a struggle for Africa to unite and not separate itself on the lines that were drawn for the benefit of colonialism. And with us in this country, this wasn't it's the same thing, and it's a struggle, and it's a lot. Sometimes politicians do not want to take positions that bring them under fire, and I think it's really a question of having backbone. Why Charles Barron is so respected in New York is because he has backbone. You know, other politicians have the backbone of a jellyfish, and so Charles stands up for it. So I think if people take that position and it's willing to struggle inside their own particular community, their own group, to explain why it's a correct position, it may not be a popular position, of why we need to unite, why we need to respect each other's demands, but we also need to unite on the basis of that respect and get mutual respect. So I don't think I really dealt with that too well, but.
I just wanted to add this, and this is a little sensitive, but I just want to be honest and open. We have the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus in the State Assembly. When I put the reparations bill together, we were focusing on the enslavement of African people, and nobody on the caucus said, what about Puerto Rico? And let me tell you why. Because we support Puerto Rico. When Puerto Rico was under attack, we supported Puerto Rico, and we didn't say to Puerto Ricans, what about Africa? What about the Caribbean? Just bear with me, right? I just want to be honest and open, because we got to have a principled unity. So allow us sometimes as African people to say we are focusing on African people. And let me say this, there are some of our Latino brothers and sisters that consider themselves Afro-Latinos or African, and so that we're down with all of that. But if we say Black Lives Matter, we don't have to be questioned of what about everybody else's life? Well, if it was about all lives matter, then we wouldn't have to say Black Lives Matter. So I just want to say that some of us feel, one of my greatest heroes, I don't know if it's yours politically, is Don Pedro Albizus Campos, who was a nationalist. Lolita Lebron, the Puerto Rican nationalists. We fought to get them out of prison. And we fought and we supported 1,000%. We support, I don't know your politics, but Maduro in Venezuela and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. We support them, and when we support them straight ahead, we don't tell them, what about Africa? We just support them because it's right to support them for their cause and whatever they're going through. I don't have much of a greater hero than Che Guevara and Fidel Castro for what Cuba has done for Africa. So when we have a hearing on reparations for African people, let us do that and support it, just as we would support any of the causes in Latin America for liberation, because I get concerned that every time we just focus on us, people say, what about everybody else? So I guess I start a little something, but just got to speak from the heart and the head.
Do we have any other Alderman King?
Wow, I hate to follow such knowledge. It's, but I want to thank you for that. Chairman Sawyer, I want to thank you for your leadership, Dr. Worrell, and everybody else who's up there on the panel. As I was sitting here, first of all, my name is Sophia King, Alderman of the 4th Ward. As I was sitting here, I was thinking about other fights that we're fighting in the City Council. One of them is a fight for 15, the minimum wage, but along with that is a fight for bringing the sub-minimum wage to parity. And why I mention that here is because most people don't know that that's rooted in slavery. Tipping is rooted in slavery. And so is the National Restaurant Association that mostly opposes it. It came out of that right after slavery ended. They only talked about tipping the Pullmans and the workers in the restaurants, which were obviously disproportionately African American and women to that effect. And so now in the City Council, we are carrying a bill that we hope to pass soon to bring that sub-minimum wage to parity, meaning to bring it up, because over the years, and still to this day, the sub-minimum wage, which is now at $6.40, the minimum wage is at $13. That's what they pay mostly waiters and waitresses who are disproportionately women and women of color and disproportionately African American. Not only that, that they themselves can't afford to pay their own bills because half of them are on some type of subsidy. So we need to make sure that even those type of reparations are here. And I appreciate your leadership, Chairman Sawyer, and there are a lot of things that we need to do on different fronts, and I think we can do it together and as individuals, but come together collectively to talk about how that impacts us. So thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Any other questions before we go to public comment? We got two more. And then we're going to public comment.
Okay, super quick. My name's Andre Vasquez. I'm the alderman of the 40th Ward. One, I wanted to thank you for putting this together because I understand what it takes to put it together. I just wanted to speak, and I'm going to be super personal here. I'm a firm believer that we're all descended from the original black woman. So the reason I say that is when people talk about black or Latino, I don't view it as such. In fact, my name is Vasquez, which is descended from the French. I don't have a lot of French in me. But what I mean to say is, like, to hear and know what some have done to us collectively, when you break the spirit and the soul, or attempt to, because we haven't broken it, right? I just want to know that I am firmly in solidarity with, and what I want to see in the organized is the same conversation on the north side of town. Because that requires our courage to have that conversation there, and my ward is 52% white. So it was tough enough for me to win my election, and I know we have comrades with us, right? Like Rosana Rodriguez, who very much agrees. And I won't speak for her, but I'll just say that. So I want to be able to talk to you to see how we can organize one on the north side as well.
Be happy to. Thank you, Alderman. Last speaker on the automatic side is Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa.
Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Ramirez Rosa, and I'm the alderman of the 35th Ward on the Northwest Side. I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor of Alderman Sawyer's reparations measure, and I'm also very proud to be the sponsor of CPAC, the Civilian Police Accountability Council, which seeks to bring about civilian control of the police, which has been one of the demands of the Black Panther Party for many, many years. I want to begin by saying that I think there was a misunderstanding of what my colleague, a Democratic socialist, Rosana Rodriguez, had to say. What she was saying was that 25% of Puerto Ricans are of African descent. And so if you're talking about reparations, if you're talking about descendants of American slavery, you have to answer the question of what are you going to do with the 25% of Puerto Ricans that live in an American colony, and are descendants of slave. And so I think that this is the question here.
Please, let him opportunity to speak.
So, and
We're going to have some respect here today, okay?
And so I think that's what the question was, which is, how do we deal with the question? And I think that there has been some work around building those alliances amongst Caribbean nations, right? Building those alliances and building that Pan-African identity. And I want to say that the reason why I signed on to Alderman Sawyer's reparations ordinance is not out of self-interest. It is not out of self-interest. It is out of a belief of solidarity. It is out of belief of understanding that none of us are free unless we are all free. And so I recognize that this society that we live in is a burning house. And I recognize that the African descendants of slavery are in the basement of that house. But just because my people are locked in the closet on the first floor doesn't mean that we're all not locked in that house and we all need to get out of that house together. So, yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. And so what I'm saying here is that there is a way that we can recognize the way in which our society is oppressive. There's a way that we can recognize in which our society has oppressed more than others without tearing into each other and without breaking into that critical solidarity that is necessary. So if someone had approached me from a anti-immigrant standpoint, if someone had approached me from a standpoint that had said, I'm just here for myself and I'm not going to stand in solidarity with Latinos or immigrants, it's much less likely that I would have signed on board to that ordinance. So I think that those in the community right now that are advocating for reparations but want to do it from a place of self-interest rather than solidarity are ultimately a detriment to the larger movement to win reparations. Because I don't need black votes to win in my district. I do not need black votes to win in my district. But what we do need is solidarity. And so that's my message. Let's stand in solidarity. Thank you.
Yeah, Alderman, let me see if I can help you out. I don't normally try to help people out like this, but let me try.
If you let them take the mic, they'll continue to.
I think what African people are saying, and our history demonstrates, is that whenever we launch a movement that's in the interest of African people, going back to the emergence of the civil rights movement in this country, and legislative initiatives have been passed inside the body politic, often it gets diluted to other groups. So, appreciating what you're saying, Alderman, I think that you have to become sensitive to what we're saying. And on the issue of reparations for enslaved African people in the world, when we come together, just hold off and discipline bringing up other issues. We can go in another meeting to discuss solidarity. The Black liberation movement is different from the civil rights movement. I come out of the Black liberation movement. And the Black liberation movement, from its outset, supported and continues to support the Puerto Rican independence movement. The Black liberation movement continues to support the Chicano independence movement because it was their land in the first place in the Southwest. The Black liberation movement supported the IRA, the Irish independence movement. So hold on, you all. We have to understand politically when to bring up and infuse other issues into an issue. This issue is about reparations for African enslaved people. And we want to talk about general unity in all of our solidarity of movement. That's another meeting. That's all I'm trying to say.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, council members. At this time, we will proceed to public comment. I have public comment sheets from several people, so we're going to have to keep this moving. I'm going to read out the first few names, and could you step up to the podium? The first person is Edward Thompson, and after that is Arthur Ward and Curtis Murphy. So we can step up in that order, please. 3 minutes, and the clock is on the wall. Edward Thompson.
I got you.
You know what? I'm going to tell you something. First of all, I was actually glad to see the Latinos here supporting our meeting and so forth. But now, after your statement, sir, you especially, I don't trust any of you. And this is why. This is why. Let me finish. Let me finish. You know, for you to come in here and misrepresent the history of Puerto Rico is dangerous, okay? Puerto Rico did not become part of the United States until 1958. And the enslavement of all Puerto Ricans, whether they be Hispanic, Afro, whatever, was done by the Spanish. And so therefore, your claim would be with the Spanish, not us. And as a legislator, you should be able to use your legislative brain to figure that out.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Arthur Ward. Arthur Ward.
Curtis Murphy.
That was him. That was Ward.
Arthur Ward.
That was him. That's close.
No, I'm Arthur Ward, sir.
Oh, well, he just okay. So who
Oh, you are Arthur Ward. Okay.
Curtis Murphy.
Curtis Murphy. All right. I want to say good afternoon to everybody. I have been in Africa for the last 8 years, but before I left, I was with NBUF. I was a part of NCOBRA, and I got to the point where I didn't want America governing over me. I didn't want to give the courts the jurisdiction because I saw the racism that went on in the courts was the same way it did back in 1867. So I can't accept it. So I heard a brother, I think it was a brother from New York, he said, the question was, what we're going to do if we don't get the reparations? He said, we're not going to allow them to govern over us. Now, that got me back involved because that's where I'm at. And there was a number of Africans after 1865 that wanted to leave the United States, never wanted to let white folks have jurisdiction over them in their courts, didn't even want the citizenship. They wanted the reparations, and they would have been gone and been through with them. But there was something forced on us. So when you say we don't want them to govern over us, I think we need to really look at that because we don't, and they don't have no right because under the certificate of citizenship, you take an oath that says you agree to abide by civilian authority, which is the Chicago Department and other people like that, and the military authority. You never agreed. We never agreed to that. So they don't really have nothing if you go to court and say, okay, well, what you got to say that you got jurisdiction from? And I don't want in Cobra, in Buff, the 12 movement, I don't want nobody to ignore the fact that we never, it might be a lot of people that wanted to be citizens, but there were Africans that did not want to be citizens. All they wanted was their reparations and be through with white folks. So I represent them, but I'll fight. The last thing I want to talk about is a DOS, because I didn't know what the argument was when I got back here. I didn't hear it when I was in Ghana. But what I heard when I got back, it said, American descendants of slaves. I said, that's me. But I'm a member of NBUF because of the principles of NBUF. At the urbans that we had in Baltimore and around the country, I was there. And so I'm a part of it in Cobra. So all I found out was the difference was who was presenting the narrative for Adolf. And so I was trying to tell people, hey, that's not what you're hearing from some of them people. That narrative don't fit me. I speak for myself. So if I say I'm Adolf because I'm the third generation freeborn from my bloodline.
I think we need to have. Were there two Arthur Wards here today? The other Arthur, there are two Arthur Ward here. You were the other one? Oh, they all wrote Arthur Ward in. Okay. And are you Edward Thompson? Okay, thank you. Call them as I get them.
Hello, everybody. I'm Edward Thompson, and I'm from the 17th Ward. And I want to share something that happened to me before, a very cruel experience. And I've been convicted of a armed robbery for a crime I really didn't commit. And it was basically because the color of my skin, you know, and they tried to give me 10 years, you know. And it was my first time, you know, in jail, period, you know. And I knew it was about the money because that's what my dad was saying. And but I had to plead for the crime in order, you know, basically it was a guy that didn't like me. He called the police and he made a false police report claim on me, you know, and he was a white guy. So, and it was downtown, you know, and that was the first time I realized, you know, like, it's like some type of racist thing going on, battle. Like, I'm thinking, like, we living in a different generation, and I'm like, wow, this is actually really still happening. Like, man, like, and all my friends right now, you know, they still be on the street, you know, and they get mad at me, like, oh, you know, meet you white, you don't hang out, you know, want to smoke weed, go to parties. I'm like, man, you know, we got to be on our P's nowadays, you know what I'm saying? Because when you sleep, you die. You know, when a shark sleep, it dies. So you got to be focused because, you know, that really woke me up. You know, like a lot of people, you know, like, it's cool to have fun, enjoy yourself, but you got to be on your P's, though, you know. And, you know, one lady smiled at me. I said hello. And her man called the police on me when I'm not even knowing. That's, you know, police put handcuffs on me, took me to a bridge, and say, give me one good reason why I don't throw you off the bridge. No, he was a straight racist guy. He told me, you black nigga, you don't belong downtown. He said, I'm going to let these handcuffs go on you. Don't bring your black ass back downtown again. And, you know, from right there, I wanted to just really, really knock the police officer out. But, you know, he had a gun. So, and that's the type of game they playing. You know, like, it's funny, but when it happened to you, laugh now, cry later. You know, okay. That's it.
Thank you. The next three are Andrew Nelson, Sarah Ross, and Marlon Watson. Yeah. Okay. You got Andrew Nelson, Sarah Ross, and Marlon Watson.
We get in trouble not by what we don't know. Can I hold the mic for myself? But I can't turn around. Unless the light turn around this way, sure. I'm glad to turn around. Thank you very much. We get in trouble not by what we don't know, it's what we know that just ain't so. Yogi Berra. All of you probably want and expect a Democrat to win the 2020 U.S. presidential election whose presumptive Republican nominee is incumbent Donald J. Trump. However, we would have a much better prospect of meeting our legitimate demands to vouchsafe reparations for American descendants of African slavery with a winning Trump Nelson ticket. I'm Andrew Clarence Merrill Nelson. To your point, Dr. Conrad Worrell, Black News Channel co-founded by J.C. Watts and
facilitated through Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis and others, should be encouraged by us to do programming that generates the imagery and optics that will affect the false news engendered by whatever you found problematic in the Harriet movie. The Harriet Tubman $20 bill shall be a 1-gram Orm U.S. note, not an unbacked Federal Reserve note. As I pointed out in my recent email to you, I said dollar gold parity shall be set at 0.05 gram per dollar. Vincentian Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves said in light of 10-10-15, Justice or Else, and the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent, that we must reverse papal bulls that saw indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere, victims of native genocide and African slavery, are due reparations. I want to address whatever concerns anyone has as it relates to reparations. And if you want Andrew Nelson for mayor of Chicago in 2023, you got him, to paraphrase Harold Washington. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Ross.
I guess I have two comments. My first comment would be, I hear a lot of talk from NCOBRA about solidarity and inclusion, but I wonder, it's really kind of hard for me, because I consider myself ADOS, when you talk about solidarity and inclusion about nationally, but yet you have someone on your panel calling us a cult in one of your opening segments. So that's a bit disingenuous. And number two, I have yet to hear anything specific that's going to be done in Chicago by this committee for Chicagoans. You know, I know it's like something global, but I need something to be really specific toward how this is going to affect Chicago in particular. That's it.
Thank you. Marlon Watson.
Firstly, my name is Marlon. I'm with ADOS, ADOS Chicago, and the Illinois ADOS Equity PAC. And Dr. Conrad Royal apologized, which we appreciate, but you can't apologize for Dr. Wimbush. You just called an entire group of people that classifies themselves as an ethnicity a cult, right, and a cult supported by white supremacists. Right. That's a problem. You owe us an apology, firstly. Well, stop my time if you're going to apologize. Stop my time. Okay. Go ahead. You go.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Stop my time if you're going to talk. Stop my.
Keep going. Go
okay,
ahead, sir.
Secondly, it seems like what you guys are talking about is equity. When we talk about a commensurate amount of contracts, public works contracts, jobs, school funding, et cetera, that's equity as a resident of the city of Chicago. As 33% of this city, we should have a certain amount of resources, funding for our schools, institutions, families, et cetera. That's not reparations. That's something we should hold our elected officials in the city and elected officials accountable to. Reparations is in addition to that. Reparations is for the injury of slavery, and that being exasperated by Jim Crow. So that's in addition to what it seems like you guys are talking about. You guys seem like you're talking about a local reparations project. Reparations is a national project. What it seems like, again, you guys are talking about is equity, which we should get anyway. And lastly, to our Caribbean brothers and sisters and those of us that are classified as black, our reparations, and this is the key with ADOS, reparations in America should go to those who are harmed through the system of chattel slavery in this country. CARICOM is very specific. They are advocates for Caribbean reparations, and I have no problem with that. But CARICOM, it's a committee that does reparative work for Caribbeans that were descendants of slavery. And we have no problems with that, but we're not included in that. In America, our reparations should go to those whose families and ancestors were harmed by this country. It's just that simple. It's very simple. If you were hit by a Coca-Cola truck and I was hit by a Pepsi truck, even though they're both soft drink companies, Coca-Cola owes you and Pepsi owes me. It's just that simple.
Thank you. The next three are Karen Hicks, Maurice Lyons, and Sister Zakiya Muhammad.
What's your name?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
put this all the way down here.
Like I'm short. First of all, I want to thank the Creator. I want to thank the Creator for sending us here to make a difference, because we need these conversations. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Wilson, because it was because of him that he came on the Butt Naked Truth show and he told Harold Davis, "What I don't know, will you teach me?" And because of that connection, we're here. I could go on and on, but let's just say this. I always see a bunch of men. I ain't mad at y'all, but I need y'all protection. What I want to see is more women. More women, because when you teach a woman, you raise a nation. And I'm saying this to all my black brothers, because today I buried my cousin. And I buried my cousin because a 17-year-old Hispanic killed him. But let me make you understand that Hispanic served up consequences to my cousin because my cousin violated his queen. I say that to say this. Until we as black people serve up consequences for those that have disrespected us, we're going nowhere. So if that means shut it down and stop being great consumers, we can come to this and talk until our heads fall off. So I just say this. I am a spirit. I'm in a flesh body. Yesterday, a policeman said that they sent this new superintendent here. Well, guess what, you all? We were sent when the Creator sent us here. And he said, till and dress the land. Till means to cultivate, dress means to set straight. It's time we get busy. A seed gets dirt thrown on it, and it grows. All the arguing is a waste of time, because we need to have these conversations more collectively. I have a talk show called Making Love by Thinking, because real love making starts in the mind. Right here, right now, is giving us the opportunity to think, because we're having a conversation. We need more of this. It's not about who's better, who's less. We need these conversations in love. And no offense to nobody else, I like everybody, but I love my own. And ain't nothing wrong with self-preservation. First, self-preservation is the very first law of nature. And we must take care of that. So, Dr. Wilson, it's an honor, it's a pleasure to be your personal friend. I work for nobody, don't nobody pay me. I work for the Creator, and I'm tired of seeing what we're going through. This is a few good women. Beatrice is a part of it, Sister Zakia, and plenty others. We coming after what's ours. Let's go, women.
Thank you, Karen. Sister Zakia Muhammad.
Yes. All right. I greet you in peace. I greet you in love and unity. I think that's what Sister Erlina Rupo would say, Dr. Conrad World. Was that her greeting? I'm going to duplicate that by greeting my brothers and sisters here. First of all, though, Alderman Rodriguez, I just left Cuba. And African Americans like myself, we stood with the Puerto Rican community. They were there in large numbers. There were over 1,300 delegations over there in Cuba, 86 countries and 789 organizations. And we were standing with the Puerto Rican community and the Caribbean community and countries in Africa. We were in solidarity. We wasn't talking about full reparations then, but we have some of the same concerns. I just want you to know that. And I was in Washington, D.C. when Reverend Jesse Jackson's wife was arrested in Puerto Rico for standing up for them pouring toxic fumes in Puerto Rico, poisoning the water, killing the people. I was there. So we're all in the same book, maybe not on the same page. But I just want to say this. It is time, sister, you said it all, Sister Karen. We got to come together. We got to stop fighting. I mean, we got reparation concerns, and we ain't even together. We arguing and carrying on and acting a fool. And again, I would like to see some sisters sitting up here at this table. Why can't sisters, we can talk. We know the history. We've done research, so sisters can be up here. I'm tired of all the time brothers up here doing things. I mean, you know, we might protest outside this evening. You know what I'm saying? No, we ain't gonna do that. But to the scholars up there that have studied and done your homework, and I've learned so much from Dr. Comrade World, down the line, I've learned so much from you all and passed it on to my children. They're more scholarly than I am. I have some paperwork I want you to take back to New York, because the next time you have this screen up when you talk about people that passed on a reparation ordinance, I don't want you ever again to forget Alderman Marlene Carter, the 15th Ward, who was the first black woman to present an ordinance on reparations in the city council floor. And when she asked me to support her, I didn't know what reparations was. Now, that's in 1990, and I thought I knew everything. She asked me would I support a reparation movement. I said, what is that? And she explained it to me. I have a copy of it. With the mayor on it, Washington, it's been stamped, approved, and all of the Latino signatures on it, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you, sister. Was there Maurice Lyons in the audience? Maurice? No? All right, the next, Daryl Seaton, Mama D, and Minister Abdullah Muhammad. Daryl Seaton. There you go, Daryl, okay. No? Mama D, I see Mama D, yeah. Mama D, there's no Daryl Seaton?
Hallelujah, greetings.
Good evening.
As a crimes against humanity descendant, Jim Crow genocide survivor, and indigenous native black Americans, my two concerns are the generational gap of disrespect among the generations. A tree is one thing. It has three parts. The roots are the elders, the trunk are the parents, and the leaves and the branches are the children and the grandchildren, but it's one thing. That's one concern, and we can take care of that by coming together on December 18th. December 18th marks the 154th anniversary of the ratifying of the 13th Amendment. And it first passed in City Hall as a Divinity Day in 1995. October 16th and December 18th were declared Divinity Days in Chicago. And last year, Alderman Raymond Lopez reintroduced that resolution called Divinity Day. So we can come together, if you are and march around City Hall 9 times, because 9 is divine, singing Lift Every Voice, and sing our national anthem that needs some support, encouraging all people that are not indigenous native black Americans to buy from a person whose ancestors never got a check. That's one thing. So if you are under if you were born before 1954, you wear the color red. If you were born after 1965, you wear the color black. And if you are born after 1984, you wear the color green. This will give honor to the red, black, and green flag that needs honor. Now, the other thing, I have flyers on it. The next thing is hooking up with the wrong groups. Only the red man and the black man, the savage and the slave, could be born in America and still not be citizens in the land of their birth. The red man got Holocaust when his land was snatched. The black man got Holocaust when he was snatched from his homeland to work that stolen land for 246 years as a movable property thing called chattel. And when he was released, he was not given any money, no land, no job, no family, no home, no education, no transportation, not even a pair of shoes to pull himself up by bootstraps. And that lasts another 88 years. So when you say we are twin victims of the American genocidal Holocaust, I have flyers. Let's get together December 18th.
Thank you. Minister Abdullah.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I greet you all with the spiritual greetings of peace and paradise of Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Along with the women, I think on the panel should be men of God. The whole enslavement of our people was prophesied to occur. There's nobody else on the planet that's out of place for 400 years but the black man and woman here in America. So since it was divinely prophesied, we need a divine solution. We cannot repair ourselves on what the enemy and slave master and his children would give us. They took the knowledge of our God from us, and it take our God to give it back. So I recommend, among all of the books that was recommended, I recommend that you read Message to the Black Man. I recommend that you read Fall of America. What am I saying?
Recommend.
Recommend. My adrenaline, I'm a warrior and I'm trying not to hurt nobody. But I recommend that we read those books. That's right, because that's where the Muslim program is at. And I'm glad you said that, because that's the next point I wanted to make. We need to discuss separation, because separation is the best and only solution between two people that's at conflict and for 463 years now, and there's never any peace between us. So we got to decide now who want to separate. We need land and territory of our own here and elsewhere, because what is reparations going to do? Where's that brother that said the police jumped on him? Where he at? There he is over there. 30 seconds? Okay, I got 30 seconds. But what I'm going to say is including him. Reparations got to cover the incarcerated who are languishing in prison, suffering injustice as a result of this country's white supremacy and racism. So we need land and territory of our own to bring all our people home. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. All right. The next three, we're coming close to a close. We're going to try to get as many in as we can. The next three, Barbara Choa Becker. Barbara, I know she was here, wasn't she? Yeah, she's here. Brian Mullins and Sheikh Osman Simmons Bey. Barbara, oh, she's coming. She's coming. I tried to help it. I tried to.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am so excited about this symposium. I really enjoyed you all. And I enjoyed reading your book too, Winbush, Belinda's Petition. My daughter's name is Belinda. She's real smart too. Well, anyway, I'm concerned that our people are not ready to unite. We need to unite. I want to get a raise of hand. How many of you here today are willing to unite for reparation? Raise your hands. Come on now. Come on now, we gotta do it. Okay, as we unite with love. You don't go around being jealous of somebody. God gave them that trait. Don't be jealous of that. Don't envy them because they're so smart. So we have to unite. Now let me tell you what we got to do this in 222. There's going to be a census report. And they depend on you saying, I ain't going to bother about that. You better bother about that. Guess what's going to happen? If you don't bother to complete the census report, the monies will not come to your community. And someone else shared with me, I want to get your opinion on it, that we should declare that we're Afro-descendants. Afro-descendants, so that we can get the money in our community. So I want to share that with you. And I also want to thank Willie Wilson for his input, because here's a man willing to serve without any rewards. He's willing to give, and that's important. Let's give him another hand.
Thank you.
And Attorney Roger, when I was in Ghana, I gave a workshop on reparation, and you know what the students said? Have you been to Ghana? No, I haven't. Oh, they told me, I love their paragraph, their phrase. They say, you stole us, you owe us. No, you stole us, you sold us, you owe us. So let's remember that. They owe us, and let's be willing to fight for it. I call 202-456-1111 every day to tell the White House, I want you to pass those H.R. 40 bills. Let's do it, you all. Can we do it? Yeah. Amen.
Brian Mullins.
How you doing? Thank you, Alderman Sawyer, for this event here. So one of the things I want to start real fast is to talk about, I'm almost confused myself if this commission is for federal reparations or local equity. Those are two different things, right? So ADOS Chicago, of course, is for federal reparations for American descendants of slavery. But on the local side, talking about the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago, that's equity, right? We know over the last 20 years, so I've heard conversation up on that panel talking about African countries and international and all that, but you know what nobody talked about? The south and the west sides of Chicago, which is where we're at, which is where this body serves, right? So we're sitting back, so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, equity means for the last 20 years, we have seen the CHA Plan for Transformation fail black people, put us out of Chicago. We watched the Chicago Police Department shoot, kill, beat, incarcerate black people. We've watched Chicago Public Schools close 151 schools, 110 under Daley, 49 under Rahm Emanuel, right? We also know that you all are going right into signing a budget for Mayor Lightfoot, right? So equity means, out of this, when you look at the city of Chicago and its sister agencies, you are talking about 20-something odd billion dollars that you all are about to sign off on in a couple of weeks. So what we want to do is ask you all for our share of that in equity coming out now, not in 2 years, not in 3 years, coming out this budget that's going to be signed in the next 2 weeks out of these agencies that's going to make us whole for all the problems that's been caused by the city of Chicago. We're talking about CHA, CPD, you know, anything. If you can go through these myriad of things. So we are asking, there are 20 black aldermen serving 18 predominantly black wards. There are 12 members of the Latino caucus. You all, 26 votes gets us what we need to start to rebuild Chicago. We know they want us out of Chicago. Poor black Chicago is under siege. We're being gentrified at every single angle, right? You all have the power right now. 20 black aldermen, we need 6. We have some white comrades over here, Alderman Kappelman. All we need is 26 votes. So we're gonna come visit you all starting Monday. Continue this conversation. What can we get out of this budget coming up now that you all will hold Laura Lightfoot? Before you give your vote for that budget, we want you all to go ahead and work with us on how do we fix schools, how do we fix all these issues in our community. And when I say to Alderman Rosas, we watched the Latino caucus publicly fight for Latino issues with this public school fight, right? You all didn't mention black schools. You said black and brown, but the CPS budget came through, when its contract came through, it only mentioned Latinos. You guys get this, not us.
Sheik Austin Simmons Bay.
Hey, I got you.
Yes, Austin Simmons Bay.
Grand Rising, brothers and sisters, I rise giving perfect praise unto Allah, the Almighty, incomprehensible, Father God of the universe. I'd like to give honors to our prophet, last prophet in these days and times, Noble Drew Ali. I'd like to give honors to Supreme Grand Sheikh, King Umar Bey. I'd like to give honors to Grand Sheikh Shaw Il as well, and his officials that are in staff as well. First off, I'd like to inform you that 2 mayors have already prior signed proclamations stating that they know the knowledge of the indigenous lineage of the Moorish American people of the North, South, Central Americas and the adjoining islands. These dates were listed with the first Moorish American Centennial Week, January 8th through the 15th, signed by Mayor Harold Washington, December 16th, 1985. The first Moorish American Holy Week, January 15th, was signed by Rahm Emanuel, December 11th, 2011. We have those documents here. Along with that, we have our own affidavit that was recorded by Solomus Jaskinowicz, August 1st, 1928, in the Cook of County. As we know, this meeting was ideally based on the thought of reparations for the African descent, but we have people that are labeled the terms African American and other misnomer terms such as Negro, Black, Colored, etc. But reparations at its etymological origin is compensation for war damage owed by aggressors. Through Black's Law Dictionary, it is to means to redress of injury or to amend for wrongful infliction. In the transitional justice reparations are measures taken by the state to redress gross and systematic violations of human rights laws and humanitarian laws. As we see, all these laws were formed and enforced by national bodies recognized by the governments in which they live and the nations of earth. So in concurrence to the issue of reparations, we propose a meeting with the mayor of Chicago, the governor of Illinois, the secretary of state, and those officials appointed by the prophet to handle this matter of compound interest based on inheritance to the indigenous people of America, and reparative infrastructure that will be owned and operated by the Moorish Science Temple of America, and it will be funded by the state and the federal government. On this day, we should work forth on an idea to make history for our third proclamation with individuals of our own, in redemption for the fallen humanity to raise nations up from the unwholesome depths of poverty into a for sure foundation. Islam.
Thank you. At this time, we're past our allotted time of 4 o'clock. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone today. We still had about 40 public comment notices, and we're not going to theoretically get to everyone. Well, let me say this, and I'll say this before we close. You know, this is not our only hearing we're going to have regarding this. The reason that I wanted to have a public comment and a town hall style meeting was because, one, I wanted to learn more, and I think a lot of us needed to learn more about what the reparations movement is. And I think I've learned a lot, and I want to continue to learn more. And this is not over. We're going to have more meetings about this because I want people to have more information about this. But please, ma'am.
And no, I'm not having a seat.
Please. Well, let me just say this. I understand that, and we'll have more time to talk about that. Yes. And before we close out, I'm going to pass it on. At this point, before I close out the meeting, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Conrad Worrell for some final comments. Doctor.
Can we all stand? Is that possible? Brothers and sisters, Brother Cam wants to let us know when the next Cobra meeting is, and then I'm going to try to close this out.
Yeah, in your primer package, I have a sheet like this. It says that meet with Cobra Chicago chapter. We meet every fourth Sunday of the month at the Washington Park Fieldhouse, 5531 South King Drive, from 2 to 4 p.m. You can contact us at @Chicago@gmail or Chicago on Facebook. Thank you.
I'd like to have a little silence for a moment, just so we can reaffirm our ancestors and have some discipline and respect, not only for our ancestors, but for each other in this room. It's a lot of disagreement, obviously. A lot of different ideas, obviously. A lot of different personalities, obviously. But it takes the whole, the African principle, the greatest good for the greatest number. The greatest good for the greatest number. And so my leader, Dr. Willie Wilson, who wrote a check so that I could bring in these top experts. Dr. Ray Winbush, Assemblyman Charles Barron, Attorney Roger Wareham, Beatrice Boyce, Alderman Sawyer, whose daddy was a partner of mine. And so now, I'm going to turn it over to Willie. We're going to close this meeting respectfully, and we will have more meetings. And I'd like to thank everyone who came out today. I really want to thank you, and the struggle continues, and reparations now.
God to close. And dear Lord, we thank you for this day. Thank you for this moment. We thank you, dear Lord, because you're God, and beside thee there is no other God. And we thank Conrad and all the people who's here, stand up here with me, and those who are in the audience for coming together in your name to try to work things out together. We may have disagreement, dear Lord, but you can fix them all. You can work with all of us. You can work with black, white, Latina, Asian, and other different religion, but work with our mind. Most important, dear Lord, work with our heart and change our heart, because you made us all. Without you, oh Lord, we would be nothing. And on tomorrow, dear Lord, if we leave here today, we look forward to Sunday being somewhere, hopefully in somebody's church. Now, dear Lord, guide us home to where we need to go. Drive us home, dear Lord, and let us thank you for driving us home, not we ourselves, and allow us, dear Lord, to eat tonight, and let's say thank you for the food that you've given us. And teach us, dear Lord, to love one another as you have loved us, and teach us to love our enemy. Change our heart. And bless every person in here today who may not have understood one another, but bless us all that we can surely may not agree with one another, but we can certainly forgive one another. These blessings we ask in your darling Son, Jesus' name, that one who said that not my will, O Lord, thine will be done. Even Jesus Christ, our precious Lord and Savior. Let the church say amen. Amen.
There being no further business before the committee, on the motion of Alderman Dow, moves to adjourn the meeting. So move. Benny, the chair, the ayes have it. The meeting is adjourned.